Shadow Slave, Chapter 351 to 351, once again. 1169 words. Once again, Sunny found himself in the endless space between dream and reality. All around him, there was nothing but a boundless black void, which was illuminated by a myriad of bright stars. Between those stars, countless strings of silver light were woven into a beautiful and inconceivably complex pattern. Once again, he felt as though he had glimpsed the inner workings of the spell. Was it just an illusion, or was he able to see more now? It was almost as if his eyes were now able to discern a hint of meaning behind the unimaginable, titanic brilliance of the ethereal weave. He had the eyes of Weaver now, after all. With a pained moan, Sunny forced himself to look away from the strings of silver light. The magnitude of the secret hidden in this cosmic pattern was so immense that just thinking about it could drive him mad. The Forgotten Shore had taught him an important lesson, and it was that one had to be careful about what they looked upon. Some things were not meant to be seen by humans. Not to mention that he had other things to think about. Curse it all, curse all of you. His voice disappeared into the darkness, full of indescribable fury, bitterness, and sorrow. No one was there to hear it, except for the spell, which chose to tactfully remain silent. Breathing heavily, Sunny clenched his fists and closed his eyes. He didn't know what brought him more rage and pain, the fact that he had lost Neff, or the fact that his secret had been revealed. Both were too bitter to swallow. All that time, all that suffering, and for what? He had outsmarted and defeated so many powerful enemies, only for his true name to be discovered by an ungrateful, weak, blind girl. After everything he had done for her, Cassie's betrayal, perhaps, had hurt him the most. Curse her. Once again, he was a slave. He made a full circle and returned exactly to where he had started. In shackles, only instead of nameless slavers, Neffis had become his master now. Neffis. Sunny gritted his teeth and groaned, a storm of conflicting emotions tearing his heart apart. Why did she have to do it? Why? The pain of losing her, the hope of finding her again, was just as strong and overwhelming as the hope that she would die and disappear forever in the unforgiving hell of the dream realm, so that they would never have to meet again. So that he would be free. He clawed at his face, not knowing how to process this conflagration of feelings. For someone who had spent most of his life alone, not caring for anything, this was all just too much. Luckily, time in this boundless void was a strange concept, so he had an eternity to try and come to terms with his new reality. The spell kept silent, as though giving him a chance to do just that. After a while, maybe hours, or maybe days, or maybe just a single second, Sunny sighed. Sometime later, he opened his mouth and whispered, quote, I won. He had survived. Who could have thought? Slightly more than a year ago, he was thrown into a region of the dream realm that no human had ever escaped, and now, he was not only returning to reality but also doing so as one of the most powerful sleepers in the history of the human race. Maybe even the strongest one. Or the second strongest. He had survived countless horrors, crossed a cursed sea on a boat made of demon bones, slew hundreds of nightmare creatures, gained experience and scars worthy of a lifetime, touched the hidden knowledge of the gods, saw a tyrant die and a new one be crowned, banished an ancient curse into the darkness of oblivion and watched as a son died. And now, he was about to become an awakened. An elite among elites, a person at the very top of society, one with access to the best food, the most wealth, the highest forms of prestige. The highest, everything, all his dreams were going to come true. All his suffering would now be rewarded. I will not be sad, I will not be bitter, I will not be angry. Why should I, had he gone through this nightmare to be left heartbroken on the other side? No, he had earned this joy, this delight, this triumph, and he was going to enjoy it. Slowly, a shaky smile appeared on Sunny's face. At first, he had to force himself, but after a while, the smile became sincere. That's right, victory is supposed to be sweet. So, let's see, what should I start with? As if answering him, the spell finally spoke. Its voice sounded a little strange, as if it was continuing a sentence after being interrupted. Opening square bracket ... Your shadow is overflowing with power. Your shadow is taking shape. Suddenly, Sunny felt his soul begin to radiate a strange heat once again. Crap, your shadow is complete. Something inside of him exploded, drowning his whole being with indescribably suffering. With a startled yelp, Sunny fell down. How come I end up on my ass every time I come to this place? The first time Sunny had appeared in the void, he was so shocked to discover the divine rank of his aspect that his legs buckled. And now, due to the painful transformation happening to his soul, he ended up in the same situation again. Because he had left the Crimson Spire, that soul conduit attribute was gone. And without its interference, the strange process that had begun due to the saturation of the shadow core was finally able to continue. It was just as painful as Sunny remembered. Gritting his teeth to prevent himself from screaming, Sunny tried to endure that terrible agony. He was no stranger to physical pain, but this was something different. It came from the soul itself, and for that reason, was so much worse. Arg, damn it all. However, it was still not nearly as bad as the chilling torture he had gone through after consuming the drop of Weaver's blood, or the nightmare he had endured after meeting the Black Knight for the first time. And it didn't last as long. After a while, the pain lessened, and then finally disappeared, leaving him feeling refreshed and whole again. Sunny carefully stood up and looked down, checking to see if he was still in one piece. He felt stronger, much stronger, faster, more resilient. Very much so. He felt so powerful, in fact, that for a moment Sunny even entertained the idea that he had subconsciously commanded his shadow to wrap itself around his body, and was now enjoying the effect of its augmentation. To make sure that this wasn't the case, he habitually glanced down to check on the shadow. And froze. What the hell? The shadow was not wrapped around his body. It was where it was supposed to be, on the unseen surface Sunny was standing on, somehow visible despite the darkness of the black void. But it wasn't alone. Two identical shadows were currently staring back at Sunny. One seemed sulking and morose, and the other appeared to be joyful and friendly. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave, Chapter 352 to 352, Monster Core. 1205 words. Sunny stared at the two shadows, dumbfounded. After a while, he said in an uncertain tone, Am I seeing things, or are there two of you? The shadows, of course, did not answer. They had no vocal cords, after all. However, the sulking one looked at him with contempt and shook its head in derision. The friendly one, meanwhile, looked down shyly and slightly shrugged. What is going on? Frowning, Sunny lingered for some time, and then dove into the soul sea. With that soul conduit attribute gone, it was back to its usual, tenebrous appearance. The surface of the water was tranquil and still, and hundreds of motionless shadows stood silently in the darkness. Above him, shining spheres containing the memories were circling around the. Sunny raised his head, then flinched. Where the black sun of the shadow core had once loomed above the quiet sea, there was now, two identical shadow cores hovered in the dark sky, shining with lightless black radiance. He blinked. There's two of them. A few minutes passed, or at least something that felt like a few minutes. There's two, I have two cores, why'd I have two cores? Humans only ever had one soul core. That was a fact, only nightmare creatures had more. Sunny looked down at his hands, then made them into fists, feeling newly gained strength course through his muscles. Then, he scowled and looked up again. Your shadow is taking shape, your shadow is complete. So the spell was not speaking about the bad-tempered shadow that had accompanied him for so long. Initially, Sunny had assumed that the shadow, and his core, were going through a transformation due to the acquisition of the 1000th fragment, perhaps evolving or even awakening. But the spell actually meant to say that his second shadow, and thus a second shadow core, were complete. They had been assembled from the 1000 shadow fragments he had collected. Making him a, what? Sunny hesitated for a bit, then ordered the shadows to wrap themselves around his body. The sulking one seemingly rolled its eyes before obeying the command, the friendly one seemed extremely delighted to do as he asked. Both flowed up and covered his body. Immediately, Sunny felt his already considerable strength double, and then triple. His mouth hung open. Too powerful, this is too powerful. This was incredible. To experiment further, he commanded one of the shadows to return to the surface of the tranquil water. A moment later, he had a shadow once again, but still enjoyed the familiar augmentation, even if it grew weaker, returning to its previous strength. He then summoned the midnight shard and ordered the second shadow to wrap itself around its blade. Now, both his body and his sword were augmented. Then, he sent the sulking shadow to join the friendly one. His body was not enhanced anymore, but the austere Tachi felt much sharper, more lethal, more deadly. Finally, he commanded one shadow to leave the midnight shard and cover the puppeteer's shroud. Two memories were augmented at the same time. Holy hell, this was just too good. Sunny stood silently for a while, staring into the distance. So this was it, this was the most unique, most powerful side of his aspect. A divine aspect, after all, was not necessarily more powerful than a lesser one. But it had much more potential. With the second core and a second shadow, the gap between Sunny and the other awakened was going to increase. And if he was right about it, if he was right, this was only the beginning. Because if there was a second core, there would most likely be the third one, and then the fourth. Suddenly, it all made sense. Why Neffy's never seemed to be able to saturate her soul core, no matter how many shards she absorbed, no matter how many nightmare creatures and humans she slew. Why she had been incapacitated after killing Gunlog. Why she was so much stronger, faster, and more powerful than him, even at his peak. It was because her aspect was divine, just like his. But she had discovered its secret much sooner than him. As a dull pain appeared in his heart, Sunny banished the image of changing star from his mind and summoned the runes. He had to make sure that his guess was right. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Dreamer. Below that, new runes were shimmering in the darkness. Sunny's eyes widened. Class, Monster, Shadow Cores, 2/7. He stared at the glowing runes, his face calm, his heart engulfed by a dark fire. Monster, 2 out of 7. He was right, after all. His progression path was indeed different from all of humanity. It was harder, larger, but also so much more promising. The promise of it was as vast as it was frightening. He was reluctant to even try to imagine the pinnacle of what he would potentially be able to achieve. The possibilities were simply limitless. What would a human with 7 cores and the might of a titan be capable of? What obstacles would they be unable to conquer? Who would dare to stand in their way? Who would dare to call them their slave? Of course, the road to creating 5 more cores would be long and arduous. It would take him years, if not decades. If he even manages to live that long. In fact, the magnitude and scale of such an ambition were nothing short of insane. After all, the stronger he grows, the stronger enemies he would have to face to collect their shadow fragments. It seemed all but impossible. Almost. Was he really going to try? After some time, Sunny lowered his gaze and continued to read the runes. His face looked like that of a madman. There were simultaneously a deep frown and a wide smile somehow coexisting on it, making for a strange sight. But then, the wide smile disappeared, leaving only the frown behind. There was something even more important waiting for him in the glow of ethereal runes. Something even more frightening. Reaching the lowest part of the field of runes, he read. Aspect. Shadow Slave. Aspect rank. Divine. Aspect description. You are a miraculous shadow left behind by a dead god. As a divine shadow, you possess plenty of strange and wondrous powers. However, your existence is empty and lonesome. You mourn the passing of your former master and long to find a new one. Right beneath it was the description of the part of the aspect that had cursed his life, turning it into a nightmare. Innate ability. Shadow Bond. Ability description. Find a worthy master and let them know your true name. Once they recite it out loud, you will be bound to their will, unable to disobey any command. It is improper for a shadow, let alone a divine one, to walk around without a master. However, the runes describing Shadow Bond were gray and lifeless, as though the ability was now inactive. Single quote. Makes sense. He had a master now, after all. He wasn't free to walk around without one anymore. And speaking of it, right below, new runes were now shining in the darkness. Master, Changing Star. Sunny stared at those 3 words for a long time. Who knew that just 3 words could bear such a crushing weight? Such a vast and complicated meaning. Finally, he shook his head slightly and concentrated, making the runes shine brighter, new ones appearing out of nowhere as he watched. Name, Neffy's. True name, Changing Star. Rank, Dreamer. Class, Demon. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 353 to 353, Lightbringer. 1615 words. The runes shimmered in the tranquil darkness of the silent sea. Name, Nephis. True name, Changing Star. Just as Sunny had suspected, that true name hid many meanings. It didn't describe a star that was always changing, but instead a star that caused change. However, there were a lot of words for change in the runic language, each hiding a unique meaning. The one used here meant a cataclysmic change that brought ruin and disaster, sometimes bad and sometimes good, but always cruel and calamitous, breathed in misfortune. So, in a sense, Nephis was neither a star of change nor a star of ruin, but both. The two went hand in hand, inseparable, destined to bring both salvation and damnation to those touched by her light. Just like what had happened to the doomed dreamers of the Dark City. The spell was really good at giving names, it seemed. Thinking of his own true name somberly, Sunny read further. Rank, Dreamer, Class, Demon, Soul Cores, 3/7, Soul Fragments, 2749 3/1000. He stared at the last two strings, a dark expression written on his face. So this is how far ahead of me you are. Then, with a heavy sigh, he looked away. Many events of the past few months made sense now. During the fight against Gunlog, Nephis had already been a dormant monster, just like he was right now, a dreamer in possession of two cores. It was because she had known that killing the Bright Lord would push her toward the third that she asked him to prevent Castor from attacking her in that moment of weakness. And in the time since, Changing Star had almost reached the fourth. How was she so fast? Sunny had made a conscious choice to avoid saturating his core during the civil war in the Bright Castle. In hindsight, this decision had turned out to be a wrong one, or maybe not. If he had collected all 1,000 shadow fragments back then, he might have been dead already, killed by one of Tessai's guards or a nightmare creature while completely incapacitated by the formation of the second shadow core. Hell, he would have been crushed to death by a piece of falling granite if not for that soul conduit suppressing the process at the best possible moment. Just as always, terrible misfortune had come together with incredible luck. But even if he had come to possess the monster core back then, he would have never managed to create a third, let alone get this close to the fourth one. It was because Nephis had one big advantage over him in the matter of collecting essence. Like every awakened except for Sunny, she received a certain portion of the enemy's accumulated soul essence when killing a fellow human, while he received only a single shadow fragment, or a few, at best, if the enemy was of the higher rank than him. Which hadn't happened yet, but was inevitably going to, considering his luck. The war against Tessai and Gemma must have been a true feast for Changing Star. Especially when slaying those experienced members of the host that had long saturated their cores themselves. She was always on the front line, after all, fighting, killing, leading her followers. Sunny grimly stared into the darkness for a while, then slowly turned back to the runes. His eyes slid lower. Memories, Dreamblade, Starlight Legion Armor, Dawnshard, Darkwing, Nameless Sun. There were a few utility memories, too, including Evertwine, the golden rope he knew so well. But Sunny did not pay them a lot of attention. His sight was attracted to the Nameless Sun. What was that memory and why hadn't he seen or heard of it before? Memory, Nameless Sun, Memory Rank, Ascended, Memory Tier, V, Memory Type, Weapon, Memory Description. For a long time, the Nameless Sun suffered in solitude, longing for all the things that were lost. Only when she lost that longing, too, was the crimson terror of the Forgotten Shore finally born. His eyes narrowed. So, she received a memory after killing the vessel, after all. An ascended weapon of the 6th tier. Sunny wished that he could see its weave and learn what enchantments that terrible memory held. Whatever they were, however, the Nameless Sun was bound to be extremely powerful. But was it enough to help Nephis survive in the ruthless hellscape of the dream realm? He did not know. Frowning, Sunny continued to read the runes. Echoes, Attributes, Dreamspawn Nephilim, Flame of Divinity, the Fire. Dreamspawn Attribute Description. You are born of two worlds, belonging to both, but welcomed in neither. Your soul exists on the edge between nightmare and reality. Nephilim Attribute Description. There once were terrible creatures born of an unholy union between the divine and the profane. Nephilim were the most beautiful, and the most harrowing of them all. Flame of Divinity Attribute Description. Your soul is aflame with the light of divinity. The Fire Attribute Description. You have inherited the lineage of Sun God. He hesitated for a bit, studying Neph's attributes. So that's how it is. Sunny had always wondered what was her innate attribute, the one that was at the center of all the rest, the core of her being, just like his fated trait. He often thought that it was tied to drive, battle prowess, or will. But it was not. Instead, Neph's innate attribute was called Dreamspawn, and tied to her nature as a child of a hollow mother. In a sense, she was connected to the dream realm, and the nightmare spell, from before she had even been born. Her core trait was duality. If his guess was correct, that duality was further expressed after Nephis had conquered her first nightmare and received her aspect, as well as a new attribute, Nephilim. Once again, it described a half-blood creature, half divine, half profane. Half deific, half unknown. Suddenly, he remembered how Changing Star had stopped and stared at the depiction of a radiant being engraved into the walls of the ancient mine below the hollow mountains. Was that creature one of the Nephilim? Or a fallen angel, from whom Nephilim were supposed to be born? After all, the similarity between that creature and her own powers was hard to deny. And then there was the last attribute, the fire. Sunny rubbed his face. A lineage attribute, somewhat similar to his own blood weave. Finally, the meaning behind that word became clear. Lineage memories akin to the drop of ichor were able to impart awakened with unique attributes that, unlike the usual ones, seemed to be hereditary. They could be passed down through a bloodline, and at least one of the great legacy clans, the almost destroyed Immortal Flame, possessed one. Did all great legacy clans, like Song or Valor, possess one, too? Was that what allowed them to rise to the very top of humanity and claim their place as great clans, in the first place? Those bastards have so many secrets. Sunny also couldn't help but notice a slight difference between Bloodweave and the Fire. While the latter was described simply as lineage, the former was described as a forbidden lineage. What exactly made Bloodweave forbidden? Was it because it didn't come from a proper deity like Sun God, but from Mysterious Weaver, who was a demon? Had no one except for gods been allowed to leave behind a lineage? The Bloodweave was also described as a partial lineage, while the Fire was not. Questions. With a sigh, Sunny turned to the runes once again. Aspect, Lightbringer, Aspect Rank, Divine, Aspect Description. You are a creature of light that was banished and doomed to exist in the darkness. You bring radiance and warmth to wherever you go, but with it comes indescribable longing. Aspect ability, Soul Flame. Ability description, your soul burns with the purest of flames. That flame can both restore and destroy, and is both a blessing and a curse. Innate ability, Half-Breed. Ability description, you can directly absorb a portion of the soul essence of any nightmare creature destroyed by your flames, as well as of any human. Flaw, Pristine Soul. Flaw description, you must suffer to use your power. Sunny dismissed the runes and was motionless for a while, thinking. The name of the aspect, Light Bringer, could be translated in several ways. The first rune could mean both light and fire, and the second meant either to bring or to bear, depending on context. So it could have been Fire Bearer as well, not that it made any difference. The rest he had already known or suspected, so it didn't surprise him much. Only the strange innate ability, Half-Breed, was somewhat new. Neffys had mentioned once that she was capable of doing something like that, but without sharing any details. It was also funny that the name of her flaw was Pristine Soul, while his was Clear Conscience. What a pair they were, one lost from light, the other the source of it. One a master, the other a slave. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes for a second. What else was there to note? That soul conduit attribute was gone. It seemed that the artificial sun or the Crimson Spire itself had sustained too much damage and collapsed, thus removing it. He had escaped just in time. I guess there's not a lot of secrets left between us now. Sunny was sure that there was a new rune that Neffys could summon, one reading, Slave. Just like he now had access to all the information about her, she was going to learn everything about him. The unique nature of his cores, the shadow fragments, the true identity of the Marble Saint, the Weaver's Mask, she was going to know it all. That could potentially complicate. Before he could finish that thought, however, the spell spoke again, its voice filling the black void with melodious whispers. The second seal is broken. Awakening dormant powers. Oh, crap, I almost forgot. Sunny stared into the void with wide eyes. He was about to awaken. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 354 to 354, Awakening. 1,350 words. Just like after the first nightmare, Sunny suddenly sensed something waking up within him. Back then, it felt as though this new power came from inside his soul as opposed to some external source. This time the feeling was very similar, only more intense, more defined. It was coming from his shadow cores. They were radiating an ethereal, but almost palpable heat. The energy was circulating through his entire body, changing it, making it stronger. It was somewhat similar to the strange feeling he got every time he received a shadow fragment, but so much more powerful. 1,000 times more powerful. And deeper, too. With a barely audible gasp, Sunny slowly sat down and crossed his legs, then closed his eyes, concentrating on the transformation. Every fiber of his being was soon full of the mysterious energy. The familiar euphoric feeling overwhelmed him, washing over his mind like a warm wave. However, Sunny wanted to feel more, understand more. He wanted to remember this moment in every detail. It was his triumph, after all. Beneath the physical changes that his body was undergoing to become better, stronger, more perfect, was another, subtle but equally incredible change. It was happening to his soul. Sunny had no words to describe it, but knew that he had never experienced anything as wonderful. The transformation of his soul was not at all painful, like the creation of the second shadow core had been, and not nearly as tortuous as the agony that consuming a drop of divine blood had caused him. It felt natural, right, and profound, as though he was coming one step closer to becoming complete, to what he had always been meant to be. A better being. Soon, the pulsating waves of heat retreated, replaced by a wave of soothing coldness. The dull ache in his heart that had remained there, unnoticed, ever since leaving the forgotten shore lessened a little. His mind became calm and tranquil. Sunny felt like a sword that had been tempered and fortified in a fiery crucible, a being made of cold, pure, resilient steel. He exhaled slowly and opened his eyes. His body felt stronger, faster, and more enduring, similar to how he felt when wrapped in the shadow. The change was sufficiently pronounced, and he knew that it would only grow greater if he used one or both of the shadows to actually augment him. But it wasn't the main difference. Sunny knew that the actual quality that separated Awakened from the Dreamers was not physical might, but a new innate ability. Just like Dreamers gained the ability to sense and interact with soul cores, the Awakened could do the same with soul essence. But knowing and feeling were two different things. Before, he could vaguely feel his shadow core. The feeling was elusive and ethereal, but unmistakable. He felt its emptiness at the start of his journey, and felt it brimming with power near the end. Now, that power wasn't contained inside the shadow cores anymore, but broke free, flowing naturally through his entire body. It circulated slowly, coming and going from the cores, passively saturating his bones and muscles with power. Sunny instinctually felt that, with some practice, he would be able to direct the flow of shadow essence to concentrate it in a certain area. He could expend some amount of essence to give his arms incredible, explosive strength for a short amount of time, or fill his legs with the power to jump a dozen meters into the air. In short, it wasn't as though he had become monstrously strong and would be all the time, crashing through walls and breaking delicate things by accident. Instead, by wisely controlling his shadow essence, he would be able to gift himself short bursts of truly inhuman physical might. The rest of the time, he would enjoy a much smaller, but still considerable passive effect of his body being saturated with freely flowing essence. More training. Sunny could now control the shadow essence by instinct, but if he wanted to truly master it and do it more efficiently, he would have to learn from experienced Awakened. Some instructors at the academy existed for the sole purpose of teaching newly awakened just that, after all. And then there was a whole other layer of combat strategy that he would have to understand and master. Sleepers thought much like mundane humans, only with more power and tools. But battles of the Awakened were much more tactical. While essence always restored itself to the core's maximum capacity, it took time. In the reality of a battle, it was a finite resource. Because of it, one had to be smart and careful about how and when to use it. He would also have to absorb as many shadow fragments as possible to increase the capacity of his cores. Luckily, he now had 2 of them, which already gave him a big advantage over the rest of the Awakened. But this new amazing quality he had received was not the end of the awakening. The main event was yet to happen. The spell spoke again, filling him with anticipation. Awakening aspect ability. Opening square bracket ... Aspect ability acquired. Aspect ability name. Shadow Step. Sunny blinked, then hurriedly summoned the runes. Name, Sunless, true name, lost from light. Rank, awakened, class, monster, shadow cores, 2/7. Shadow fragments, 0.2. Just as expected, both of his cores were not dormant anymore, instead becoming awakened. The shadow fragments were consumed to fuel the awakening, bringing him to a stark and sad 0. 1,000 fragments, gone just like that. He wasn't really disappointed, though. The amount of essence consumed during the awakening directly corresponded to the starting capacity of the core, and thus, the extent of the physical transformation that a sleeper would go through. By collecting 1,000 fragments and fully saturating his first core, Sunny not only received a second one, but also made sure to gain the best benefits a sleeper could dream of. Very few awakened had ever fully saturated their cores before returning from their first journey to the dream realm, and now, Sunny was one of them. The difference was not drastic, but every little bit of power counted in a life and death situation. Enough stalling. Impatient, he banished the thoughts of cores and shadow fragments and found the description of his new aspect ability. Aspect ability, Shadow Step. Ability description, you can move freely between shadows, traveling from one to another in an instant. Looking at the shimmering runes, Sunny soon discovered that there was a stupid grin on his face. Teleportation, that's teleportation, right. That was, without a doubt, a form of teleportation. An ability such as this was a game changer. His mobility would become truly incredible. Not only would he be able to apply it to traversal, making his future ventures into the dream realm easier and safer, but it could also play a decisive role in a battle. What was more deadly than an assassin capable of appearing out of nowhere and disappearing from sight in a blink of an eye? Not many things, really. Of course, he would have to experiment and learn the true extent of this amazing ability. What was its range, for example? Would he be able to jump to any shadow in sight, or to any shadow in the range of his shadow sense? Did a shadow have to be deep and large enough for him to fit through, or would even the smallest and faintest of them do? And what about his own shadows? Would he be able to send one to a certain spot, and then step out of it, just like Saint usually did? He couldn't wait to learn. But before that, there were two other things he had to see. One was the new memory he acquired. The other one, and the one that filled him with nervous anticipation, was much more important. It was the relic he was supposed to receive for mastering the first step of the shadow dance. With a legacy relic in his hands and a lineage attribute coursing through his blood, Sunny would be theoretically eligible to create his own legacy clan. A great clan, even. Not that he was planning to. But before Sunny could glance at the corresponding runes, the spell suddenly whispered into his ear. Wake up, Sunless. And instantly, the black void full of bright stars and silver light disappeared. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 355 to 355. Back to reality. 1004 words. On one of the underground levels of the Academy Hospital complex, in a small room that was filled with the massive rectangle of the dream pod and various pieces of medical equipment, a delicate girl with pale blonde hair was sleeping beneath the transparent glass lid, her face surrounded by wisps of cold vapor. Suddenly, a series of lights ignited on the surface of the pod, and the medical machinery in the room came to life, producing various noises. A few moments later, the girl opened her striking blue eyes and screamed. On the top floor of a private care facility in the center of a city, in a spacious room with tall windows and a luxurious interior, a state-of-the-art sleeping pod stood silently, bathed in sunlight. An attending nurse sat in a comfortable chair beside it, monitoring the vital signs of a beautiful young man who slumbered inside. For the past 3 years, there had not been a single minute when the young man was left alone. His pod was surrounded by fresh flowers, and someone was always there to keep watch. For 3 years, the flowers and nurses came and went, but the young man had remained the same. Nothing about him ever changed. Suddenly, the nurse opened her eyes wide. A second later, the sleeping pod shone with bright light. Its lid swiftly slid sideways and hid in a special housing slot. The figure inside was slowly raising in the air, as if pulled up by an invisible force. The beautiful young man was levitating. The nurse remained motionless for a few seconds, stunned. Then, she hastily ran to the panel on the wall and pressed a call button. In a small apartment in one of the less prestigious areas of the city, in a tiny room, a tall young woman was lying in an old and barely functioning pod. This one was possibly the last representative of its model, taken out of production a long time ago. Still, it seemed like the most luxurious thing in the apartment, by far. The door of the room was open, letting in the sound of a news broadcast. A pleasant and confident tone was currently saying, "Unusual number of awakenings. Dear viewers, we are currently receiving a report from our correspondents, and will be able to update you on this event shortly." The representatives of the great legacy clans, meanwhile. Suddenly, the sound of the broadcast was cut out, replaced by a heavy, hopeless silence. Soon, the sound of tentative steps could be heard, approaching the room where the pod stood. Just a second later, however, a fist slammed into the armored glass of its lid from inside, sending a net of cracks through it. Back in the academy, in a room identical to the first one, the lights suddenly blinked and then went out. It was now shrouded in absolute darkness. Something crashed down with a thunderous noise, and then, a pained human voice hissed. Damnation. A moment later, the lights came back, revealing the figure of a lithe young man with pale skin and dark hair standing near an overturned medical monitor. There was a disoriented, confused expression on his face. The lid of the sleeping pod was still closed. However, it was empty. And a few hundred meters away, hidden even deeper underground, there was another room. This one was slightly bigger, and much better guarded, than all the others. In it stood a simple sleeping pod. Beneath its transparent lid, a young woman with ivory skin and long silver hair slept, undisturbed by anything. Despite the growing commotion outside, inside the tranquil room, it was quiet and peaceful. Nothing changed. The pod did not shine with bright lights, the medical equipment remained silent. Imprisoned in the glass coffin of the sleeping pod, the young woman continued to dream, as if cursed to remain in her nightmares forever. Sunny looked around the small room, slowly realizing where he was. Academy. He was back at the academy. He had returned to the real world. He looked around, noticing the medical equipment and the sleeping pod, all of which were currently ablaze with the light of alarms. The pod was still closed. How the hell did I get out? Speaking of which, looking down, Sunny realized that he was naked. To avoid any awkward situations, he summoned the puppeteer's shroud. Once the armor weaved itself out of black strings and covered his skin, he felt a lot better. He did, however, have to force himself to not summon the midnight shard as well. His instinct screamed, demanding him to arm himself in an unfamiliar environment. But this was the real world. He had to adjust his behavior. The decision to clothe himself turned out to be the correct one. Just a few moments after he had made it, the door of the room opened, and a woman in a white coat rushed inside. Noticing Sunny, she froze. Her eyes widened in horror, and she raised a hand to cover her mouth, as if suppressing a scream. What's wrong with her? Sunny frowned, blinked a couple of times, then looked at his reflection in one of the medical machines. Single quote ... Oh, since both sleepers and awakened traveled to the dream realm in spirit, his actual body was whole and pristine, without even a single scar. However, the same could not be told about the puppeteer's shroud. The silk armor was torn and dirty, looking like rags. What's more, it was covered in so much blood that it was hard to tell that its fabric had once been gray. Looking at the doctor in embarrassment, Sunny forced out a smile and said in a raspy voice of someone who had not spoken in more than a year. Hi, can I maybe get some clean clothes? The woman stared at him for a few moments, then said in a trembling voice. Slee, awakened sunless. Sir, you are awake. Sir, did she just call me sir? Sunny grinned. I sure hope so. I've been sleeping for a year and 2 weeks, after all. The doctor finally seemed to relax and looked at him with a relieved, happy expression on her face. A few moments later, she smiled brightly and said, her voice full of sincere joy. Welcome back to the real world, sir. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 356 to 356. Interview with the Shadow. 1,200 words. The hospital complex and the administration of the academy were in complete chaos today. Weeks following the winter solstice were always a busy time for all the people working on the periphery of the awakened society, since most of the sleepers who had ventured into the dream realm that year usually returned in a span of 1 to 2 weeks, very rarely a month. Those who had survived, of course. The sudden awakening of so many sleepers who had been gone for years, counted as irrevocably lost, created a shockwave that spread through entire humanity. And people at the academy were at the epicenter of that storm. It was a joyous chaos, nevertheless. In a small office at the surface level of the hospital, a young woman dressed in black slacks and a white blouse was sitting behind a desk, hastily compiling a short report. She had dark brown hair, neatly tied into a high ponytail, and thick glasses that were constantly sliding down her nose, forcing her to push them back up. The young woman was one of the administrative workers tasked with the initial debriefing of returning sleepers. As such, she had seen a lot of incredible things, and heard a lot of incredible stories. And, sadly, even more heartbreaking ones. But today was like no other day in her career. The sleepers that she was debriefing today were all anomalous, each and every one of them. The things they told her made her blood run cold, and her imagination fail. She even had an urge to dismiss their reports as false, but knew that it was nearly impossible. The lie detection technology built into the walls of the office would make lying very hard to pull off. Incredible, they are incredible, every single one of them. To survive for that long in a region of the dream realm completely cut off from the rest of the human territory, one populated by nightmare creatures much more powerful than any dreamer could ever become, the achievement of these brave young men and women was truly remarkable. It filled her with a sense of compassion, pride, and hope. Humanity received an unexpected, but wonderful gift today. Finishing the report and sending it to her superior, the young woman pressed a button to let the next sleeper know that it was their turn to come in. The door of her office opened, and a pale young man with dark hair entered the office. Because of the nature of her job, she was accustomed to interacting with incredibly attractive people. Almost every awakened was pleasant to look at, after all. The young man in front of her was far from being the most outstanding in terms of appearance among them, and yet, for some reason, she was unable to look away for a couple of moments, a natural smile somehow finding its way onto her face. There was something elusive about the young man that attracted attention, almost demanded it. He was of small height, with a delicate, slender build and perfect white skin. His dark eyes had a humorous, slightly mischievous spark in them. The young man wasn't exactly handsome, but due to his small stature, pale complexion, and dark hair, he looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. And there was a subtle strangeness about him. The young woman couldn't quite put it into words, but it seemed as though his every move, every word was ever so slightly not exactly how they should have been. Not really wrong, but also not completely right. This quality was equally as disturbing as it was magnetic. It was the reason why she couldn't stop paying him a bit more attention than to all the other sleepers she had interviewed today. The young man smiled and sat down opposite her. In response, her own smile widened a little. Good day, my name is Teddy, and I will be your interviewer today. Awakened, Of course, she already knew his name. His file was opened on the screen in front of her, containing all the information the academy had on the pleasant young man. But it was important to create a friendly environment to allow the sleepers to relax. After their experiences in the dream realm, most were tense and on edge. Second to last place in the ranking. Poor kid, I can't even imagine what horrors he had to survive. The young man answered in a pleasant tone. Sunless, but people usually call me Sunny. So, awakened Sunny, I guess. No, that sounds weird. Just call me Sunny. Teddy nodded, then typed a few words on her pad. I will ask you a series of questions about your time in the dream realm. The purpose of this briefing is to enrich our base of knowledge about it, as well as let us know how to better assist you in the future. Any little bit of information you can provide might help future dreamers in their own trials, but you don't have to answer if you don't want to, of course. Awakened Sunless, Sunny, nodded seriously. I understand. I promise to be honest and tell you only the truth. I am a very honest person, you see. Teddy smiled and asked the first question. How long have you spent in the dream realm? Sunny sighed. A year and a few weeks. Although, it felt much longer. That matched the information in the file. This is so terrible. A whole year out there. She smiled with encouragement. I see. You did very well, Sunny. Very few dreamers had managed to survive for that long, especially in a region such as the Forgotten Shore, right? He shivered slightly before answering. Yeah, that's what we called it. Teddy typed a few more words. From the interviews with the other dreamers, we have confirmed that the region of the dream realm you were sent to is populated with nightmare creatures of the awakened rank and above. Can you confirm that information? The young man grew a little paler and nodded again. Yeah, awakened, fallen, corrupted, too, although those only appeared at night. Teddy added a couple of lines to her report and asked, have you participated in the battles against such nightmare creatures? If so, how many have you killed? Sunny was silent for a second, then raised his hand and began counting on his fingers with a thoughtful expression. 3 or 4. She began to type in thought. 4 awakened creatures. That poor kid looked so weak, and yet he managed to defeat 4 abominations much more powerful than him, despite being in second to last place of the ranking. Good job, Sunny. You are truly admirable. But Sunny didn't finish speaking. Hundreds. Teddy froze, staring at the monitor. Excuse me. The young man thoughtfully scratched his chin and said, yeah, I think that's right. Around 400. After a long and awkward silence, he asked, I am sorry, Teddy, is everything all right? She nodded slowly, then forced out a smile. Quote. Everything is fine, Sunny. I am sorry. We'll have to pause the interview now. He looked at her with sincere surprise and blinked a couple of times. Really? Why? She cleared her throat, then answered in a small voice. I'm afraid that I am not qualified to conduct this interview. My superior will be with you shortly, son, awakened sunless. Please wait for a few minutes. Sunny sighed. Oh, well, all right, it's been nice to meet you. With that, he gave her a bright smile. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 357 to 357, Risk and Reward. 1,361 words. Sunny left the office of the government agents in a strange mood. The conversation went exactly as he had planned. Even after a higher-ranking specialist had been called in, he managed to steer the interview in the right direction, manipulating both answers and questions to achieve the desired result. In the end, he wanted everyone to know that he was someone exceptional, but not so exceptional as to overshadow the best of the best. Someone who was in the very highest tier of young awakened, but also at the very bottom of that tier. Even though he had kept his most outrageous accomplishments to himself, it felt weird to give away so many secrets about his skill, power level, and achievements. Sunny had grown so used to pretending to be a pathetic clown that removing that mask to reveal another, less outlandish mask was not easy for him. And yet, it was something he had to do. After he had awakened, there was not a single moment for him to properly think things through. He had to go through a series of medical and psychological tests, followed by a lengthy debriefing. However, he had been able to realize one thing very clearly. His situation had fundamentally changed. Now that his most important secret was revealed and Nefis had become his master, it was as though a crushing burden had been removed from his chest. Replaced by another, even more terrible weight. In any case, he could finally allow himself to relax a little, for a while, at least. Not because he trusted her that much, but because she was currently imprisoned in the dream realm, unable to enforce her control over him even if she wished to. In a sense, as far as his worst nightmare becoming reality went, this was the absolute best version of how things could happen. He had a lot of time to think about countermeasures and prepare for whatever the future held, after all. Walking through the corridors of the hospital complex, Sunny was engrossed in thought. One thing he was sure about was that a divine shadow like him could only have one master. So, he didn't have to worry about someone else finding out his true name and enslaving him, not anymore. The guillotine blade that had hung above his neck all that time was now gone. However, he still kept the existence of his true name a secret, for one simple reason, he didn't know what was going to happen if Nefis died. Would he be free forever? Or die with her? He felt that neither of these theories was correct. Firstly, because the description of the aspect described him as a divine shadow that had lost its master, which probably meant that he could lose another one and remain alive. Secondly, because the runes of the shadow bond had become gray and lifeless, but did not disappear. Which meant that they might shine with ethereal light once again in the future. So, the most probable explanation was that he would be safe as long as Nefis remained alive, and if she was killed, anyone would be able to use the true name against him once again. A deep scowl appeared on his face. How long could anyone survive in the decimated remains of the Forgotten Shore? The dark sea was gone, but so was the sun. Most of the nightmare creatures were dead, but the strongest ones survived. It seemed that Changing Star had escaped the collapsing Crimson Spire, at least. What was she going to do now? Try to cross the Hollow Mountains to reach the human citadels, or try her luck in the unexplored regions to the north, west, or east? What were the chances of her making it back to the real world alive? If it was anyone else, Sunny would say that the probability was 0. But it was Nefis, after all. For some reason, he was sure that she would survive, somehow. So, yes, even though many things remained unclear, his situation had fundamentally changed. He was an awakened now, which meant that there were countless possibilities in front of him. To get access to the best opportunities and the most advantageous treatment, he needed one thing, status. At this point, continuing to pretend to be a weakling would only be a hindrance. Sunny wanted to reap as many rewards as he could without putting himself at risk. That's why he shifted his usual pattern of behavior and gave the government agents enough information to paint himself as an exceptionally talented awakened. Not that he had a lot of choices. Sooner or later, people were going to learn at least some things about his time on the Forgotten Shore and see that a weakling simply would not have survived all that. Luckily, there was no shortage of exceptionally talented individuals who had awakened today. On any other day, Sunny's description of his prowess would have made a huge splash. But currently, he was just one of 100. Speaking of that 100, turning a corner, Sunny suddenly found himself in the middle of a small crowd of people. Dozens and dozens of young men and women were standing in the middle of a small hall, most dressed in the simple training clothes provided by the hospital, just like he himself was. On their faces, there was an indescribable kaleidoscope of emotions: joy, sorrow, worry, anticipation. Most were looking at a small screen displaying a long list of names. These were the survivors of the Dreamer Army. Not everyone was here, of course. Some spent many years on the Forgotten Shore and had been transferred to other facilities by the government or their families. Sunny didn't see Sishin, Kai, or Effie. Or Cassie. His face darkened. The absence of the first two made sense. Kai was probably being cared for in an expensive VIP care facility, while Sishin had to be kept in the stronghold of her clan. However, he had no idea where the other two were. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then looked at the list of names displayed on the screen. Before he could read anything, however, someone quickly approached and hugged him tightly. What the? Looking up, Sunny saw a vaguely familiar young man holding him in a passionate embrace. A moment later, the young man let go of him and looked down with glistening eyes. Sunny, you are here, too. Before he could even answer, a somber expression appeared on the young man's face. In a voice that trembled with emotion, he said, thank you so much, Sunny. If it wasn't for you and your shadow, we would have never made it to the gateway. At the sound of these words, the others turned around. As soon as they saw Sunny, bright smiles ignited on their faces. A hum of voices rose from the crowd. Guys, it's Sunny. Thank you, man, we will never forget what you did for us. Sunny stared at them, dumbfounded. Weird, this is so weird. Ever since he had come to his senses near the sleeping pod, mundane humans were treating him with the utmost respect. They even went so far as to use honorifics, calling him, Sir, or, Awakened Sunless. And now this, why was everyone so friendly and happy to see him? He had never experienced anything like this before. Was this what it was like, to be an awakened? After dozens of young people came closer to shake his hand or happily pat him on the shoulder, he awkwardly smiled. Ah, it's nice to see you too, guys. The young woman who was currently facing him smiled in response. Then, however, her face turned dark. Have you heard anything about Lady Neffy's after coming back? He stiffened, then shook his head. No. Have you? She turned back to the screen, tears appearing in her eyes. Nothing, none of us did. Out of everyone who made it to the spire, only 2 are unaccounted for. We think she is still inside. Sunny remained silent for a while, then asked. Who was the second? The young woman sighed. Sir Castor. No one had seen him near the gateway. He must have gone to help her hold back the terror, and. Her voice trembled. Someone said that he died. Oh, gods, what if Lady Neffy's dies, too? Sunny lingered for a few seconds, a grim expression on his face, then squeezed her shoulder lightly and quietly walked away. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 358 to 358, Shadow Step. 1,556 words. The hospital staff had provided each of the newly awakened with a small room at one of the underground levels of the complex, to have a place to rest and get accustomed to their new abilities while waiting for more permanent accommodations, if they were going to remain at the academy, of course. It was also a place they could take their families to talk and spend time together in privacy. Currently, many emotional reunions were taking place in similar rooms around Sunny's, made especially joyous and heartbreaking because the survivors of the Dreamer Army had spent long years on the Forgotten Shore. They had gone through hell, indeed, but their loved ones in the real world had suffered a great deal as well. Not that Sunny would know anything about that. No one had been waiting for him to return, after all. In any case, the room he had been provided with was sufficiently comfortable. There was an area for training, a desk with a pitcher of water and some snacks, a sofa, and even a bed. None of the returned were going to sleep, of course. Not for a few days, at least. At the very end of the field of shimmering runes, Sunny could now see a new string of symbols. Gateway. Usually, the name of the gateway that an awakened had last used would be written there. This was their anchor in the dream realm. Every time an awakened fell asleep, they would be transported to the gateway they were anchored to, spend some time in the dream realm, either as much as they wanted or as little as possible, only until their soul was ready to travel between worlds once again, and then go through that gateway to wake up back in reality. However, the gateway of the Forgotten Shore had been destroyed. For that reason, every single survivor of the Dreamer Army now had no anchor in the dream realm. That didn't mean that they would remain in the waking world forever, though. Rather, it meant that they were going to be transported to a random one as soon as they fell asleep, just like during their first journey into the land of nightmares. The prospect of being at the mercy of the spell once more was nothing short of terrifying. Especially for Sunny, who had the misfortune of always finding himself in only the most extreme of circumstances. However, the situation wasn't really that bad. There was a way for a newly awakened to change their anchor without relying on chance. It was to acquire the services of a saint, who would be able to take them to the dream realm without involving the spell, appearing near the saint's own anchor. Of course, that anchor would most likely be situated in one of the human citadels, allowing the awakened to anchor themselves to a gateway in human territory. There were just a few dozen saints alive across all of humanity, so for an average awakened, their help was not easy to get. However, Sunny was not an average awakened. In fact, none of the survivors of the Dreamer Army were. Every year, the most promising of the newly awakened were recruited by powerful citadels and provided the means to anchor themselves to their gateways. Everyone profited from this arrangement. The talented awakened received a chance to change their anchor if they wished to do so, while citadels received new powerful defenders or useful craftsmen to enhance their living conditions and infrastructure. With how extraordinary the 100 survivors of the Forgotten Shore were, and how unusual their circumstances turned out to be, there was going to be a small recruitment war happening in the next few days. Prosperous citadels were going to fight for the right to add these outstanding young people to their populations, promising better and bigger rewards, as if during an auction. The government would inevitably get involved, too, helping those who for some reason failed to find a citadel to call home. The survivors of the Dreamer Army just had to remain awake long enough to make a choice and settle the details of their future anchors. Since their physique was far superior to that of mundane humans, they didn't have to sleep every day, so 2 or 3 were not going to be a problem. Sunny had a lot to do in these few days. The first thing he had turned his attention to after retreating to his personal room was test the limits of Shadow Step. The result of these tests left him pleasantly surprised. Just like he had suspected, the ability to travel between shadows was akin to a weird form of teleportation. He could enter a shadow that was large enough to encompass his body and instantly appear from another. The distance of that jump, however, was not too large. Currently, it was even smaller than the range of his shadow sense, around a dozen meters or so. However, he knew that it would increase as he absorbed more shadow fragments, just like the range of shadow control had increased back on the Forgotten Shore. There was an exclusion from that rule, too. He was able to travel between his own shadows no matter how far apart they were. By now, he could control his shadows from as much as a couple of kilometers away. That meant that, if both were sent into opposite directions and reached the limit of the shadow control range, he could potentially instantly cover about 4 kilometers of distance in less than a second. And that was just one side of Shadow Step. The other was, arguably, even more miraculous and unexpected. Before, Sunny could move through shadows as though he was one of them, becoming practically undetectable. But now, he could literally become a part of the shadows, diving into them and becoming incorporeal. Not only did it make him completely undetectable by means of sight, hearing, and smell, but it also allowed him to move with incredible speed through any uninterrupted shadow, no matter how long and vast it was. In that state, he was invulnerable to physical attacks, but also unable to perform physical attacks of his own. It also felt very strange. Sort of peaceful. Sunny had to constantly remind himself to concentrate and not forget what he was doing. That ability would become truly incredible at night or in the depths of some terrible cave system, like the one they had traveled through on their expedition to the Hollow Mountains. In short, Shadow Step was incredible. However, it came at a price. Unlike Shadow Control, which was as natural to Sunny as breathing, using Shadow Step required him to expend essence. The more distance he covered with a jump and the more time he spent as an incorporeal shadow, the more essence he would have to consume. Sunny suspected that the theoretical 4-kilometer jump would eat through all of his essence, leaving both of his cores dry as a desert. Spending essence was not the same as spending shadow fragments, of course. His soul always slowly generated essence, eventually filling his cores to their maximum capacity, while shadow fragments increased that maximum capacity and were used to create new cores, as well as turn echoes into shadows. Still, he also needed essence to fight effectively and use the more powerful enchantments of higher rank memories, so balancing its expenditure was an intricate task. Truly, becoming an awakened had opened a whole new layer of both incredible opportunities and insidious problems. It was a lot to take in, but he was going to get there, eventually. Sitting on the floor of his temporary quarters, Sunny sighed and summoned the runes. Finally, it was time to reap his reward. He had worked so much, and done so much, to get here. First, repeating the same sword strike thousands of times, day after day, until his hands bled and his muscles screamed from the pain. Learning the basic katas and movements of Nef's flowing battle style, then gaining enough insight into it to make it his own. Almost dying to receive the gift of clarity, then fighting against the Shadow Saint and slowly incorporating her grounded technique into his. Studying the movements of his shadow to catch the slight difference in how it held itself, then spending countless hours trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind it, until his mind was ready to boil. Solving that mystery and traveling into the past to observe the birth of the nameless temple slave, and the beautiful dance of his mother. And then, tortuous practice and arduous process of turning his vision of the elusive and wonderful battle art into reality. Only to finally succeed in the middle of the furious, bloody battle against Nefis. Of all his achievements, this was perhaps the one he was proud of the most. Because Shadow Dance was entirely his. It was something he created out of almost nothing, something that bore and expressed his individuality. Sunny had never received any type of inheritance, so this legacy, which was created by himself and for himself, held a special place in his heart. Looking at the shimmering runes, he read, Aspect Legacy, Shadow Dance Mastery Level, 1/7. First relic, claim, second relic, unearned, third relic, unearned. Holding his breath, he concentrated on the runes describing the first relic and whispered. Claim. As Sunny watched, the runes glowed brightly for a few seconds and then changed. First relic, claimed, and a moment later, the spell spoke softly into his ear. You have received an Aspect Legacy relic. You have received a Shadow, Soul Serpent. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave, Chapter 359 to 359, Soul Serpent. 1,244 words. Sunny stared at the runes for a while, then slightly tilted his head. A shadow, what an unexpected boon. Usually, a legacy relic came in the form of a memory, or very rarely an echo. Perhaps there were some other types of relics out there, but he had never heard of them. That didn't mean much, though. By now, Sunny was reasonably certain that there were a lot of things that he, as well as the rest of mundane humans, had never heard about. Awakened kept a lot of secrets. Nevertheless, receiving a shadow pleasantly surprised him. Looking up, he saw new runes appearing out of thin air. Shadows, Marble Saint, Soul Serpent. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then furtively looked around. The small room was empty and quiet. Feeling a little bit stupid, Sunny shook his head and summoned his new shadow to take a good look at it. A slight breeze moved his hair, and in the next second, nothing happened. Sunny frowned and looked around the room, then scratched the back of his head. What the hell? Where's the damn snake? He had hoped to see a giant serpent made out of shadows appear in front of him, with black scales as thick as plate armor and a mouth wide enough to swallow his enemy's whole. Or an average-sized snake, at least. But there was nothing. He even checked to see if a new shadow joined his two invaluable helpers, but no. Both rested on the floor, one seemingly content, the other bored and in a perpetually bad mood. Weird. He raised a hand to rub his eyes, but froze at the last moment. What is that? There was something dark on the skin of his wrist, peeking out slightly from beneath the sleeve. Following intuition, Sunny hastily stood up and took off the top of the training suit provided to him by the staff of the hospital complex. Left naked to the waist, he then looked at himself through the eyes of the shadow. Single quote. Out there on his pale skin, an intricate image of a black serpent was tattooed, so detailed that it almost seemed alive. The serpent coiled around his arms and his torso, its tail resting just above his right hand, its head just above his left. Quote. What? I have a tattoo now. In the darkness of the small room, the serpent almost seemed to move under his skin, two curved fangs threatening to break its surface. It was striking, beautiful, and disturbing. Of course, Sunny recognized the serpent immediately. Both the nameless temple slave and his mother had a very similar image marking their skin, after all. It was the shadow god's mark. But why did his new shadow turn into a tattoo? Confused, Sunny listened to his body and soul, trying to feel if something had changed about them. And soon, he did notice a small difference. The flow of the shadow essence through his body had changed. If previously it had circulated naturally, now, it seemed to follow the coils of the serpent, moving faster and with more intent, as if directed by them. Soul Serpent, does that thing enhance my shadow essence control? To experiment, Sunny poured essence into his limbs and then performed several movements of shadow dance. After that, he jumped from one shadow to another a few times, expending even more essence. He felt the difference instantly. Not only was he able to control the essence better, but it also seemed to be consumed at a slightly slower pace, and restore at a faster one. Soul Serpent served as a channel for it, existing both on the material and the spiritual plane. As such, it was connected both to his cores and to his body, creating a strange bridge that allowed Sunny to use his shadow essence with better efficiency. This is a very useful shadow. Those words were an egregious understatement. Sunny had already understood how important and vital managing essence was for the awakened. Any tool that could enhance that aspect of their power was truly precious. And he got such a marvelous one, practically for free. He was also sure that the serpent would only get more powerful in the future, provided he kept it well fed, of course. But how was he supposed to feed memories to a tattoo? Perplexed, Sunny thought for a bit, then finally concentrated on the runes once again. Shadow, Soul Serpent, Shadow Rank, Dormant, Shadow Class, Monster, Shadow Attributes, Shadow Guide, Soul Weapon, Shadow Description. When the end came, Shadow was the last of the gods to be destroyed. Many have resented him for creating death, but in the end, death embraced all. Noting the interesting detail of a connection between Shadow God and death, Sunny lowered his gaze. However, the last string, the one he had been accustomed to paying the most attention to when it came to Saint, was missing. There was no indication of how many shadow fragments it would take to make the serpent evolve. Sunny frowned. Come to think of it, that strange shadow was clearly connected to his soul. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence that it was a monster. Sunny was a monster himself, after all. So, maybe, the serpent would not evolve its class like Saint had, by consuming the soul core of a suitable nightmare creature. Most likely, it would grow alongside Sunny himself. But why was it of the dormant rank, while Sunny had already become an awakened? Maybe its rank was not tied to Sunny's soul, but to his comprehension of the shadow dance. Currently, he had mastered only the first of the 7 steps of the battle art, and the serpent belonged to the first of the 7 ranks. Would it evolve to a higher rank if he mastered more steps? Full of thoughts, Sunny sighed and turned his attention to the shadow's attributes. Shadow Guide Attribute Description. Soul Serpent guides shadow essence as it flows through your body. Soul Weapon Attribute Description. Soul Serpent can assume the form of a weapon. The form of a wait, what? Sunny blinked a couple of times, then stared at his left wrist, where the head of the Soul Serpent was drawn under his skin. Its scales were so intricate that it almost seemed as if the creature was moving. Now, it really was moving. Following Sunny's mental command, the Soul Serpent slithered up to his hand, and then escaped from it, turning into a dark blade. As the coils moved across his body, the blade grew longer and longer, until a hilt wrapped in black leather rested comfortably in his grip. The tattoo was gone. Sunny found himself holding a lustreless greatsword. It was a menacing, formidable, foreboding odachi. Including the hilt, the odachi was as long as he was tall. It was surprisingly light for its length, but heavy enough to inflict truly devastating wounds. Almost invisible on the dark steel, a lifelike image of a coiling serpent was etched into its blade. He weighed the greatsword in his hands for a while, then smiled darkly. Single quote. Truly, this is a weapon worthy of a shadow. It was still weak, though. If it was a memory, it would have been only a dormant one of the 2nd tier. Sunny was going to have to put in some work to make the dark odachi really fearsome. With a sigh, he commanded the serpent to slither back onto his body, and then to disappear entirely. A few seconds later, his skin was clean and empty once again. What a bountiful harvest I had today. Sunny stared at the darkness for a few minutes, then sighed heavily. It was time to do something that he had dreaded doing ever since returning to the real world. He couldn't put it off any longer. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 360 to 360, Broken. 1,539 words. In a heavily guarded underground room, a young woman with silver hair was sleeping in a transparent machine that kept her body alive. Her face was pale and thin, painted by the ghostly glow of machine lights and deep, angular shadows. The room was peaceful and silent, the hum of machinery creating low background noise. From time to time, a piece of medical equipment produced a sound and grew quiet again. A blind girl with piercing blue eyes stood quietly near the sleeping pod, an empty expression written in the delicate lines of her beautiful face. If it wasn't for the fact that her hand rested on the hilt of an elegant rapier, a person would easily mistake her for one of the hollows that were cared for on another level of the hospital complex. The door of the room did not open, however, there was suddenly another presence inside. A young man with pale skin and dark, cruel eyes appeared out of the shadows and walked over to stand on the opposite side of the sleeping pod. His steps were soft and quiet. He lingered for a while, then looked down, at the young woman sleeping beneath the glass lid of the mechanical coffin. For a second, his face became contorted by a terrible grimace. Grief, anger, fear, and longing mixed in his eyes, then disappeared, hidden behind a mask of cold indifference. Sunny stared at Neffis for a long time, trying to get his emotions under control. He knew that seeing her like this, weak and helpless, would affect him. But he didn't know just how much it was going to hurt him. He also had not anticipated how dark the thoughts entering his mind would be. Single quote. I can kill her right now. One strike of the moonlight shard, and I'll be free again. But no, he couldn't. Firstly, because there was no guarantee that Neffis would die if her body was destroyed. Just like there were hollows, people whose souls had been destroyed while leaving an empty body behind, there were lost, people whose bodies in the real world had died, leaving their souls wandering the dream realm. He suspected that this was the reason why the people who wanted Changing Star dead had sent Castor to kill her in the dream realm instead of infiltrating the academy. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, he simply could not bring himself to harm Neffis. Not again, not anymore, and not like this. Cassie, on the other hand, with a dark grimace, Sunny slowly moved his gaze to the blind girl. As if noticing it, she turned slightly and said, Hello, Sunny. He stared at her, his eyes burning with fury. What, you can see now? Cassie lingered for a moment, then shook her head. No, but, something like that. A wild grin appeared on his face. Congratulations, really, good for you. You won't be useless anymore, at least. He knew that his words were going to hurt her, and was glad to say them for that reason. The blind girl didn't react, and just continued staring into the emptiness, her eyes cold and distant. But he wasn't fooled, he knew her well enough to recognize the ocean of pain hiding behind that coldness. Good, suffer, you deserve this. Sunny opened his mouth, wishing to accuse her, but then forced himself to stop. He had to keep himself under control. Swallowing his angry words, Sunny gritted his teeth and spat. How did you even know? Cassie hesitated for a bit, then answered quietly. When you killed that spy from the castle. You said it out loud then. I saw it, in a vision. After that, the rest was not impossible to figure out. His eyes widened. Sunny remained silent for a long time, trying to deal with the shock that her words had caused him. Harper, when I killed Harper. The memory of that horrible day sent a shudder through his soul. He remembered it so vividly, the blood streaming down his hands as he held the pitiful young man down, murdering him, giving in to the agony of the flaw. And whispering in a hoarse, barely audible voice. Lost from light. I am, lost from light. Standing in the underground room of the hospital complex, Sunny wanted to both laugh and cry. So this is it, this was what did me in. One mistake, I only made one mistake, and it was all it took to undo me. It was almost as if Harper had managed to avenge himself from beyond the grave. Well, he had never gotten a grave, really. Sunny just dumped his body in the ruins, for the nightmare creatures to feast on. A lot of good it did him, in the end. Piercing the blind girl with a burning look, he said through gritted teeth. So that was why you were waiting for me back then, why you gave me the eternal spring. You were ready to say goodbye. You knew. Cassie slowly faced him, then said in a steady, even tone. Yes, I did. Sunny looked down, clenching his fists. You knew. If you knew, then why didn't you try to change anything? Why, curse you. Cassie stared at him, her calm expression finally collapsing. Pain, sorrow, and anger contorted her face, and with a voice so hurt that it almost sounded as if she was bleeding, she answered. Didn't try. Of course, I tried. I tried everything I could to make the future I saw change. But no matter how much I tried, it never did. It always remained the same. Even worse, my attempts only made it appear even more inevitable. Turning away, she gritted her teeth and remained silent for a while, her hands trembling. I was the first one to understand what my vision of the Crimson Spire meant. Shadows devouring a dying angel, I understood it on that very day. Cassie closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke again, her voice quiet. Don't you remember? I even asked you to promise to always protect her. And what did you say? Sunny stared at her, remembering. Yes, at the very start, there had been a conversation like that. Quote. No, I said no. A fragile smile appeared on Cassie's face. Yes, you said no, and on that day, I knew that I had to make a choice. And I made it. I chose Neff. She shivered and hugged herself, as if dying of cold. I had to betray one of my best friends to save the other. And I did. I chose to sacrifice you to save Neff. Of course, I fooled myself for a while, telling myself that nothing bad would happen. That if I helped Neff, maybe both of you would survive. But deep down, I knew that it was just one of the possible outcomes, so what was the difference? I betrayed you, and you know what? A small, bitter laugh escaped from her lips. It was for nothing. I betrayed my best friend, and nothing still changed. I sacrificed you, but couldn't save anyone. Despite it all, I couldn't change fate. Sunny stared at her for a while, then snarled. Quote. That's it. That's your speech. That's what you have to say for yourself. What do you want me to do? Pity you? A furious gleam appeared in his eyes. After everything I have done for you, after I saved your life countless times, took care of you as if you were my sister, this is how you chose to repay me. By giving my biggest secret to Neff, so that she could use it against me when the time came. Cassie remained silent, not saying anything. Do you even know what you've done? Do you even know what you've taken from me? She hesitated for a bit, then answered quietly. I didn't know why, or how my vision would come true. I only knew that it would happen in the spire. So I gave your secret to Neffy's, hoping that she would survive thanks to it. Sunny laughed, then grew quiet. An oppressive silence settled between them, and remained unbroken for several minutes. After a while, he finally said. Quote. I can understand. Rationally, I do. You were forced to make a terrible decision, with both choices being a betrayal. And you chose to help Neff, who was with you first. Who saved you when I would have just left you to die. But then, a cold gleam appeared in his eyes. But that doesn't mean that I can forgive it. You go to hell, Cassie. Go to hell and die there, for all I care. I hope that I will never see you again. With that, Sunny turned around to leave, but then stopped. He couldn't help but be cruel to her one last time. Oh, and that secret. It was the reason why she got stuck there all alone. So, in a sense, you have doomed both of your friends. As he spoke those words, Cassie flinched. A satisfied, vindictive smile appeared on Sunny's face. But why did it hurt him so much to say those words? So, congratulations. You've made it back, Cassie. Go back home, spend time with your family. Didn't you tell me that your mother makes the best eggs? Eat your fill, try to enjoy them, knowing what you did. As the blind girl paled and turned away with a broken expression on her face, he smiled bitterly and dissolved into the shadows. Bonds of friendship were such a fragile thing. They were so hard to create, but so easy to break. All it took was a moment. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 361 to 361, Making Plans. 1075 words. Sitting with his back against the door of his room, Sunny stared ahead, his heart empty. He had lived most of his life alone. 1 year ago, he had entered the dream realm alone. And now, he was alone once again. But not having something was very different from losing it. Now that he knew how precious true friendship and affection were, existing without them felt like torture. It felt like there was a bleeding wound on his soul, left there after he had so cruelly severed the tether connecting him to Cassie. One of the very few people he cared for in this world. Hurting her felt good and justified, but instead of relief, it only brought him more pain. Nevertheless, he did not regret what he had done. Sometimes one had to endure suffering. Sometimes, pain was necessary. Now, Sunny was completely alone. So was Cassie, and somewhere in the dream realm, Neffys was alone, too. The three of them had done the impossible, but paid a heavy price for it. What a fiasco. Who would have thought that one day, he would not only escape the Forgotten Shore, but also become vastly more powerful than he had ever dreamed, only to sit on the floor in a dark room, feeling miserable. With a resentful grimace, Sunny shook his head and sighed. Enough of wallowing in self-pity. He had a lot of things to do. A lot of plans to make. The horrors of the Forgotten Shore were now behind him, but new threats already loomed in the distance. Firstly, he was now at the mercy of another person. Despite the fact that his master was lost in another world with very low chances of ever making it back, Sunny felt that they were fated to meet again. He didn't know how to feel about that. Or rather, he both desperately longed for Neffys to return and wished that she died. His emotions for her were intense, overwhelming, and an absolute mess. Despite all that, Sunny didn't think that she would die. Somehow, he was sure that Neffys would not perish in the dream realm and eventually make it back. Maybe in a few months, maybe in a few years, but she would achieve the impossible once again and return to the real world. The question was, how? Would she travel to the human territory through the Hollow Mountains, or head in another direction? They didn't know much about what surrounded the Forgotten Shore from the east, west, and north. He doubted that those places were better than the horrifying, misty mountains, though. That doubt was based on one simple fact. There was no information about them, which meant that no human had ever returned from those regions of the dream realm to tell the tale. Although deadly, Hollow Mountains were at least known to mankind. Chances were, Changing Star would choose to try her luck there instead of venturing into the unknown. Nothing was more dangerous than that which you knew nothing about, after all. Unknown. Sunny frowned. That was another problem he had to face, or rather, an opportunity he would potentially be able to exploit. Due to his fated attribute, Sunny had stumbled onto the legacy of a creature named Weaver and got a glimpse into the secrets of the gods. What he saw there left him both terrified and breathless. There was a boundless mystery hiding in the ruined land of dreams and nightmares, a tapestry that connected the dead gods, the unknown, the demons, and the nightmare spell together. The former rulers of the dream realm were gone, but the spell remained, and humanity, including Sunny himself, had now become an unwilling part of that tapestry through it. Sunny's most ardent desire was to control his own fate, and he couldn't achieve it without knowledge. Now that he knew what to look for, he had to deepen his understanding of the fate of the gods and the origins of the spell. Who knew, maybe that was where the keys to his freedom were hidden. And then, there were the sovereigns. His face grew dark. Honestly, why is everything so complicated? Why couldn't he just open a memory store, become wealthy and fat, and live peacefully ever after? That was his plan all along. However, the recent revelations made Sunny doubt the validity of such plans. Judging from what Castor had said, there were some figures hiding in the shadows, ruling over the human world. And not only were they there, but Sunny was also, apparently, unwillingly doing their bidding. He still remembered the warning Neffys had given him once. She told them that there were words that could get him killed simply if he learned of their existence. Well, now he knew a lot of those words. Sovereigns, domains, lineage memories. Was he going to pretend to know nothing and hope that those powerful beings would not turn their gaze to him one day, or was he going to do something to prepare for the day they do? Did he even have a choice, knowing what he did, with his fate hopelessly entangled with that of Changing Star, who was embroiled in these clandestine machinations just by virtue of her birth? So bothersome. What was he supposed to do? What was the plan of action? Sunny sighed. Well, it was simple, really. Learn as much as he can about the sovereigns, but in a way that would never lead back to him. Explore the past of the dream realm to gain insight into the demons, the gods, and the unknown. But first and foremost, grow stronger. Much, much stronger. When Neffys returned, he had to be ready for the worst. Sunny didn't really think that Changing Star he knew would abuse her power over him. In fact, he was almost sure that she wouldn't. Not only because of the bond between them, but also because in Neff's warped mind, doing so would simply be beneath her. However, he wasn't going to let this sweet hope prevent him from creating contingencies. If she ever decided to truly make him a slave, one of them was going to die. Standing up, Sunny walked over to the desk and wrote on a piece of synthetic paper. 0 2000s. Then, he summoned the runes, glanced at them, and added a second string of numbers. 2749 3000s. However, the runes shimmered and changed before he was done writing. The number of soul essence grew bigger. Sunny stared at the runes for a few seconds, then corrected the number. Then, he put the pen down and looked at the piece of paper in front of him. 0 2000s 2773 3000s. Alright, so, this was it. This was the plan. From now on, this was his life's goal. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 362 to 362, Breakfast Invitation. 1,189 words. The initial series of tests, the interview with the government specialists, the somber conversation with Cassie, and the hours Sunny had spent pondering about his past, present, and future took up almost an entire day. A new dawn was already bathing the world in soft sunlight, which Sunny knew because one of the walls in his underground room was made into a false window, with a vista of one of the parks in the academy being projected onto it from a remote camera. He was experiencing mild mental fatigue, but was not sleepy at all, at least not yet. Truly, the physique of an awakened was much more resilient than that of a mundane human. There were still a few things he had to do. In all the turmoil of the past 24 hours, he had not gotten a chance to take a proper look at his memories, for example. Sunny was about to summon the runes when, suddenly, there was a knock on his door. He flinched. Single quote ... What? Who could it be? For a moment, a mental picture of Effie and Kai appeared in his mind, but then he dismissed it. The two of them must have been as busy after their awakening as he was. Much more, most likely, considering that they probably had friends and families to deal with, too, on top of everything else. With them being in different facilities, coming to the academy just to pay him a visit was not a likely scenario. Certainly not that soon. Hiding one of the shadows on his body to appear like a normal person, Sunny walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was a striking, confident woman in her late 20s. Immediately, it seemed as though the temperature inside of the room dropped by a couple of degrees. She had short, raven black hair and icy blue eyes. Her flawless skin was smooth, supple and as white as snow. The woman was dressed in a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and black leather boots. The jacket of the uniform was casually unbuttoned, revealing a tank top that was currently drawn taut against her full. Crap, quote. What are you staring at, awake and sunless? Sunny looked up with wide eyes. Master Jet, I was just, appreciating your fashion sense. Indeed, it was Soul Reaper Jet, the Ascended who worked for the government and had welcomed him back to the real world after the first nightmare. Sunny had sometimes thought about this beautiful woman during his journey into the dream realm. Not only because the 3 pieces of advice Master Jet had given him ended up saving his life on multiple occasions, but also because she was from the outskirts, just like him. Knowing that someone as unfortunate as that had managed to not only survive, but even thrive in the ruthless reality of the nightmare spell had given fuel to his determination as well as providing vital perspective. But what was she doing at his door? Sunny studied Master Jet, suddenly full of doubt. She looked exactly as she had a year ago, the only difference being that her uniform had more wrinkles, and there were now dark circles under her eyes. As he watched, she grinned. My fashion sense. Why, thank you. If you want, I can introduce you to my tailors. You will have to sign a few thick contracts to receive a comfy suit such as this, though. Sunny forced out a smile. Ah, I see. Those tailors are slightly out of my price range, I'm afraid. But thanks for the offer. After a short pause, he cautiously asked. Master Jet, it is very nice to see you again, but, to what do I owe the pleasure? I am sure that you are too busy to visit every random returnee. She looked at him for a couple of seconds, then suddenly yawned and shook her head to chase away sleepiness. Quote. Correct, but since there's some procedure you still have to go through and we already know each other, I thought that I'd do the honors. With that, she looked around the deserted corridor of the hospital complex with a dubious expression, lingered for a couple of seconds, and then asked. Wanna eat? Sometime later, the two of them were walking through the ground level of the Academy Hospital. Sunny had thought that Master Jet would take him to the cafeteria there, but instead, she headed toward the exit. Where are we going? I thought the cafeteria was this way. She looked at him with confusion, then grimaced slightly. Hospital food? No thanks. Let me take you to the instructor's lounge. That's where they keep the really good stuff. Sunny coughed. But, Master Jet, you're not an instructor. She smiled, then pointed to the 3-star insignia on her left sleeve. Technically, I'm not, but the academy is a government facility, so I outrank most of the people here. What are they going to do? He blinked a couple of times, then shrugged. Indeed, what are they going to do? Tell a master to get out. Who would be that suicidal? As they exited the hospital complex and walked across the academy grounds, Sunny couldn't help but throw furtive glances at the confident young woman. Not because he was mesmerized by her, but because seeing her again was a strange experience. Back when they first met, he was just fresh from the first nightmare, barely accustomed to his new status as a sleeper. Being in the presence of a master was like standing in front of a legend. He remembered vividly how much fear and awe this beautiful stranger inspired in him. How acutely he felt the measure of ease with which she would be able to kill him, if she wished. All it would take was a flick of her finger. Now, slightly more than a year later, so much had changed. He was still pretty sure that he had no chance of taking her in a fight, a fair one at least, but the reverent fear was gone, replaced by simple respect. Sunny knew that he had it in himself to if not win, then at least survive a confrontation with someone like Jet. In a sense, he was now half a legend himself. As he thought about how different things had become, the two of them approached a small, picturesque building near the center of the academy. Without slowing down, Master Jet walked past a few people that were staring at her with a strange mix of regard and disdain, and entered the instructor's lodge. Oh, right, I remember Teacher Julius mentioning that she has a terrible reputation. To be exact, he described her as a murderous savage, barbarian, having a problematic personality, and psychopathic killer. No wonder people were giving them weird looks throughout the whole walk. For some reason, Sunny suddenly felt annoyed. Maybe because Jet was someone he knew, or maybe because she used to be an outskirt rat just like him, but he found himself feeling protective. Stare away, bastards, see if we give a damn. Master Jet clearly didn't, so why would he? Sunny looked at the next person to give her a dirty glance coldly, activating the murder math to its fullest potential. Immediately, the onlooker paled slightly and turned away. Sunny smiled. That's right, look away. Now, the most important part, let's see what the instructors eat. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 363 to 363, Citizen Sunny. 996 words. At first glance, the interior of the instructor's lounge seemed simple and cozy. Most of the furniture was made out of wood, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Bright sunlight streamed through the tall windows, which were open slightly to let in the chilly winter air. However, his eyes widened slightly when Sunny realized that all the wood around him was natural, not synthetic. Extravagant, wasteful. Noticing his expression, Master Jet smiled slightly. Let me guess, you have never seen that much real wood in one place. Sunny hesitated, then gave her a nod. Only in the dream realm. The young woman grinned, moved a chair back with her foot, and sat down at one of the tables. Where do you think all this came from? He looked around, seeing the instructor's lounge of the academy from a completely new perspective, then silently sat down, lost for words. Master Jet summoned the menu, made a selection, then leaned back and tiredly rubbed her face. Believe it or not, the chair you're sitting on is made out of a dead titan. Sunny stared at her, shocked. Suddenly, he had a strong impulse to jump out of the chair. Quote. What? She chuckled and gestured around. All of this, actually. Back when Bastion was first established, it was surrounded by a vast, and very hungry, forest. The whole thing was one giant nightmare creature. Clan Valor spent decades at war with it, losing many knights. In the end, the forest was destroyed, leaving behind a lot of high-quality lumber. And here we are. Sunny scratched the back of his head, then cautiously knocked on the wooden table. The thing seemed dead, but he decided to remain alert, just in case. It had once been a part of a titan, after all. Soon, their food arrived. Sunny half expected for it to be delivered by an actual echo, but luckily, it was brought by a mundane automated server. Taking his plates off the motorized tray, Sunny stared at the feast in front of him with wild eyes. There were fried potatoes, baked beans, juicy roasted meat, a salad made out of real vegetables, a bowl of fragrant soup, several pieces of oven bread, butter, jam, and even chocolate pudding for dessert. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. It was also his first time seeing some of these things in real life. Suddenly, the position of a research assistant once promised to him by teacher Julius did not seem so unattractive. Please excuse me. Master Jet waved at him and concentrated on her own food. Not wasting any time on manners, Sunny assaulted his breakfast with the same level of ferocity as when battling nightmare creatures. Some time later, with his belly on the verge to bursting open, he pushed away empty plates and leaned back with a satisfied smile on his face. This is life. Master Jet glanced at him with a dry smile. What did I tell you? This is where they hide the good stuff. Sunny looked at the empty plates with regret inside. Yeah, although after a year of eating almost nothing except for monster meat, I would have been satisfied even by synth paste. Her smile dimmed at the mention of the most common food in the outskirts. As 2 glasses of beautiful dark tea steamed in front of them, Master Jet sighed, then took out something from the inner pocket of her uniform. It was a small metal box with a sensor on its lid. Placing the box on the table, she looked at Sunny and asked. You must be wondering why I visited you, right? Sunny tilted his head slightly, stared at the metal box for a few seconds, and then answered in a cautious tone. Yes, to be honest, I am very curious. She nodded, then smiled reassuringly. Don't be nervous, it's just a formality, and a very beneficial one, at that. Put your finger on the sensor. He hesitated, then did as she had told. The sensor buzzed for half a minute, and then a small green light ignited on the metal box. With a quiet click, it unlocked. Master Jet opened the box and took out several objects, a slit communicator made out of flexible glass, a memory chip with the government seal etched on its surface, and a small iron badge with 2 stars engraved into it. Pushing them toward Sunny, she lingered for a moment, and then said in a light tone. Congratulations, awakened Sunless. You are now officially a citizen. Of the 7th rank, no less. Her words struck Sunny like a hammer. Silent, he stared at the 3 objects in front of him, his face not betraying even a hint of emotion. A citizen. Back in the outskirts, people lived and died dreaming of becoming one of the true citizens. That simple word hid so much meaning. Access to proper food, human rights, and better life. To all the things that none of them really had. To having a future. Very few of these people had ever gotten the chance to hear the word citizen in connection to their name. Being poor and lowly only led to becoming destitute and falling to the bottom. It rarely led to rising higher, let alone soaring to the peak. And here he was, not only becoming a citizen, but even jumping over all the steps and arriving at the very pinnacle of the social hierarchy in one go. Not just a citizen and not even one of high rank, but of the highest. 7th rank, there's literally nothing higher. Finally, his expression changed, becoming grim. Looking up at Master Jet, he asked in a somber tone. I get it that I would be made a citizen after awakening. But, 7th rank, isn't that a little too much? Master Jet laughed. Sunless, you don't really know what you did, do you? Sunny looked at her without humor, then said. I'm pretty sure that I do, but please, enlighten me. She shook her head and sighed. Listen, of all the sleepers that had returned from the dream realm in the last few years, there are only 5 whose files were marked as SS. And you are one of them. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 364 to 364, SS Class Awakened Sunless. 1182 words. Sunny stared at Master Jet, a strange expression frozen on his face. After a while, he asked. That's great, but, what the hell does, SS, mean? She smiled and sipped her tea, looking at him across the table. Placing the cup back down, she then shook her head slightly and said. The government, and the powerful legacy clans, of course, keeps track of every awakened in the world. That shouldn't be a surprise for you, right? Sunny slowly nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. Master Jet shifted slightly, then continued. Firstly, because every awakened technically has a duty to respond when a gate opens near their location, that's what the special communicator is for. In exchange for all the privileges we receive, we have to protect this world from the nightmare creatures. A dark grimace appeared on her face. Of course, realistically, no one can force you to actually fulfill that duty, or at least no one is going to. Many awakened turn around and run as soon as they receive a gate crisis alert. Sunny grimaced. On one hand, he understood such a reaction perfectly. Why would they want to risk their lives for random strangers? Not every awakened was good in a fight, too. Not everyone was like the artisans of the Dark City, who had gone into battle side by side with those dreamers who possessed combat aspects. But on the other hand, the idea of running away while monsters were devouring mundane humans and wreaking havoc in the real world simply rubbed him the wrong way. It seemed as though Sunny had somehow developed a bit of pride in the past year. He didn't want to run from the nightmare creatures and capitulate to the spell. He might have even been infected with having morals. Better squish this lunacy fast. Oblivious to his thoughts, Master Jet continued. Secondly, newly awakened are monitored because everyone wants to recruit the best of them. Talents need to be nurtured, and for that, they need to be recognized first. So the most promising awakened receive a mark on their file. Usually, it's SA, or simply S. Do you know what that means? Sunny shook his head. She grinned. SA means strategic asset. There's not a lot of awakened who are considered to be important enough to be assigned that designation. Having one means that you are viewed as a person who can potentially be important to the very survival of humanity, or at least make an impact on the global scale. Simply put, it's either someone whose aspect can be extremely useful to society or someone who has a high chance of becoming a master, maybe even a saint. Master Jet took another sip of tea, then gestured lazily at herself. Like me, not to brag, but people with the S designation are few and far between. That's why we usually receive a lot of attention and support from either the government or the legacy faction we decide to align with. But here comes the best part. She grinned. Currently, everyone is running around and foaming at their mouths because of you guys. All 100 of those who returned from the Forgotten Shore were marked as strategic assets. That is an unprecedented event in human history. A sudden appearance of 100 powerful awakened is not that important in the grand scheme of things. But if those awakened all have a very high chance of becoming masters, maybe even saint, that would be enough to completely shatter the current status quo. Sunny stared at her, thinking. Up until now, everything that he heard was in accordance with how he had imagined things to be. But, I get it. However, what's that about me being marked as SS? What does SS stand for? Master Jet nodded. I was about to explain. Above those marked as strategic assets, there are those marked as special strategic assets. SSA, or SS for short. This designation is even rarer. Actually, very few people had ever gotten it. What it means is that you are considered to have a very high chance of becoming a saint. You know how rare transcendent are, right? So, of course, everyone now wants to be your friend. Including the government, hence the 7th-ranked citizen status. She looked at him with an apologetic smile and added, quote. Granted, out of the 5 people with the SS designation, you are the least outstanding. No offense. Sunny glanced at her and smiled slightly. None taken. Who are the other 4? Master Jet shrugged. 3 of them are the only ones who received true names from the spell after leaving the Forgotten Shore, Awakened Athena, Awakened Kai, and Awakened Cassia. The 4th one is Awakened Song Seishan, who is, well, from one of the great clans. To be honest, your own achievements, while still incredible, pale in comparison to theirs. But someone had noted that you went from being the second to last in the academy rating to leading 100 sleepers to the gateway during the last leg of the journey. You are seen as someone with great growth potential, in short. He nodded, somewhat satisfied by that answer. It's not as bad as I thought. Actually, it was perfect. It was exactly the result he had hoped for, to be considered one of the best, but also the worst of the best. He needed status to receive all the best opportunities in this world. He needed to have value. Looking at the beautiful ascendant in front of him, Sunny took a sip of the tea, then smiled brightly. So, that really sounds great. A great honor, and so on. But what I really want to know is what exactly can I get thanks to being the 5th most incredible person of an entire generation? Master Jet laughed and glanced at him with approval. Good, straight to the point. Well, that depends. What is it that you want the most? Sunny didn't hesitate before answering, his tone steady and firm. To be free. The smile disappeared from her face. Looking down at her tea, Master Jet lingered for a while and then said wistfully. Then you're out of luck. I am sorry, but freedom is just a myth, Sunless. No one is free in this world. Mundane humans have to toil and struggle to remain alive. Even if they are fortunate enough to reach the height of success and acquire great wealth, their lives still belong to the awakened who protect them from the nightmare creatures. But the awakened, we are not free, too. Our lives belong to the spell. She paused, then added with slight sadness. If we want to survive its trials, we need to tether ourselves to others, be it powerful clans, or the government, or even just the members of our cohort. We have to depend on our allies and companions, and they in turn have to depend on us. All of us are chained to one another, Sunless, and that is the only way we can survive. So, think again about what you want. Think carefully. Sunny stared at her for a long time, his eyes full of a dark, deep, heavy emotion. After a while, he sighed slowly, then said, if that is the case, then I want to be strong. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 365 to 365, Young Prospect. 1,369 words. Master Jet looked at him for a while, then smiled. Perfect, that is a good goal to have, especially for people like us. She took a sip of tea, then closed her eyes for a few moments. Quote. Alright, there are many ways to become strong, some more straightforward than others. Ideally, you would want a powerful organization backing you up, but that is not the only way. In fact, such a partnership is a double-edged sword. You gain a lot, but also have to give a lot in return. I'll provide you with the basic information, and you can decide for yourself. Sunny straightened a little and listened to her attentively. Master Jet thought for a few seconds, and then said, in this next few days, you will have to decide what citadel to go to. That is not the same as joining a faction, but closely tied to it. Usually, young awakened have to compete for the right to join a desirable faction and therefore be taken to the citadel it operates from. Your case is different, though. Everyone wants you, and I mean everyone. So you can pick any of the human citadels in the dream realm to call home. She paused, yawned, and then continued. As you should already know, there are 3 great human citadels in the dream realm, as well as many smaller ones. The primary citadels belong to the great clans, while the smaller ones can be either ruled by a lesser clan or remain independent. Regardless, all of them are situated around the 3 main human enclaves and tied to them in one form or another. No matter where you go, you'll be in the sphere of influence of one of the great clans, it's just that you can be either in its center, close to the center, or on the periphery. Sunny scratched his head. What about the government? Doesn't the government control many citadels? Master Jet shook her head. Out there in the dream realm, the government has less influence than the great clans. It does, however, maintain a presence in all the important citadels, which allows us to play a unique role. In the dream realm, we serve as a connective tissue between the 3 factions, I guess. That flexibility has its own benefits, if you ask me. She knocked lightly on the table and said, in any case, even if you decide to refuse the obvious choice of settling in one of the great citadels, you'll have to select one of the 3 territories. They are not connected, as some people think. In fact, there are deadly and extremely hazardous regions separating each of the human dominions from each other. So, that is going to be your first decision, which territory to choose. That made sense. If Sunny chose to go to Bastion, for example, he would have the opportunity to build a relationship with the Great Clan Valor, which ruled it, or any of the lesser clans in its sphere of influence. He would lose the opportunity to be recruited into the Great Clan Song, though, or any other clan that existed in a separate human territory. And so on. Master Jet finished her tea and looked at the empty cup with a solemn expression. Oh, yeah, this is where I was supposed to give you the recruitment speech and try to convince you to join the government forces. But I'm not going to. You are smart enough to figure out the pros and cons of that path by yourself. All I will say is that you will never be truly accepted as an equal by the members of the legacy clans, SS designation or not. Maybe they won't say it to your face, but you'll always be treated as someone, a tiny bit lesser. At best. Sunny's expression darkened. Castor's face suddenly appeared in his mind, eyes full of disdain. What had the proud scion called him? A mongrel. Single quote. Well, that mongrel got to your throat. Who's laughing now? Master Jet had a similar kind of expression on her face. Had she experienced her own share of hardships because of her lowly background? Most likely. As Sunny was pondering what Master Jet's path to becoming an ascended must have looked like, she sighed, then smiled with irony. Not that entering a legacy clan is a bad deal. Actually, it's a dream come true for many, most even. With your renown, Sunless, any clan would be happy to give you patronage. Some might even adopt you. Hell, with your looks, even marriage is not out of the question. As Sunny choked on his tea and did an actual spit take, Master Jet laughed. Marriage? What marriage? She shook her head. How do you think legacy clans recruit talents? There are patronage contracts, adoptions, and matrimony, the latter being the preferred method when it comes to true gems. Anything to enhance the bloodline, you know. As Sunny stared at her with wide eyes, Master Jet chuckled and continued. In any case, these are your options. You can go with the government, one of the 3 great clans, or a lesser clan. Each will provide you with plenty of incentives to join them instead of others. The most wealthy factions will even shower you with soul shards. You and I both know how important those are. Few people can refuse such an offer. She sighed wistfully, lingered for a bit, and then added. Of course, you can also remain independent. In that case, you won't have any special support outside the usual benefits of being a highly regarded awakened, be it in the form of training, resources, or access. But you also won't be tied down by any obligations, free to travel around the dream realm as you wish, making a living by hunting nightmare creatures or providing useful services to your citadel of choice. There are plenty of independent awakened out there, although few who are truly successful. It's a tough way to live. Sunny rubbed his face, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the cornucopia of choices in front of him. He had no need for soul shards, but being showered in them still seemed like a great experience. Master Jet grinned, quote. So, what do you think? He hesitated for a while, then said. I don't know, that's a lot to take in. I'll have to think about many things before making a decision. She nodded, as though that was an expected answer. Good, nothing good can come from rushing such a matter. With that, Master Jet took a small, secure plastic container out of her pocket and pushed it to Sunny. He took it and raised an eyebrow. What's that? She shrugged. A pack of military-grade stimulants to keep you awake for a while. Don't use more than 1 patch at a time. Wait, why am I explaining this to you? You're from the outskirts, so your knowledge of stimulant use must be extensive. In any case, with that, you'll be able to stay lucid for about a week. Contact me when you're ready to make a decision, and I'll arrange the rest. Oh, also feel free to call me if you have any questions, scratch that. Not any questions, just important ones. She stood up, stretched a little, and gave him a little smile. Well, it's been nice seeing you, awakened Sunless. You did well, staying alive out there. Warms my heart to know that another one of us did. I'll be off, then. Time waits for no one, and all that. She turned around to walk away, but Sunny stopped her. Master Jet. She glanced at him in confusion. Yeah, Sunny hesitated for a bit, then raised his newly issued, expensive, slit communicator. I don't have your contact. Master Jet stared at him for a while, then grinned. Want to get my number? Huh. Feeling his ears turning slightly red, Sunny coughed, but then took hold of himself and said with an easy smile. Yes, how else am I going to call you when I've made a decision? The beautiful woman shook her head, then took his communicator and entered her contact information into it. Returning the communicator to Sunny, she looked at him and said. Quote. Can't wait to hear from you, awakened Sunless. See you later, then. With that, Master Jet walked away, leaving Sunny alone at the table. Looking around, he sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said quietly, I wonder, can I get another of everything I ate? That'd be great. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 366 to 366, Lessons of History. 1,637 words. Some time later, Sunny exited the instructor's lounge. The clear winter day welcomed him with chilly wind and tiny snowflakes dancing in the sunlight. Despite being dressed very lightly, his skin was covered only by the soft fabric of the simple training suit provided to him by the staff of the Academy Hospital complex. Sunny did not feel too cold. That's being awakened for you, I guess. If it had been a year and a few months ago, he would have been desperately searching for shelter, hoping that he would not freeze to death overnight or, even worse, get sick. But now, Sunny felt great. He wasn't even uncomfortable. Pulling down his sleeves to hide the serpent tattoo, he inhaled the cool, perfectly filtered air, smiled, and started walking. Decisions. The conversation with Master Jet had been useful, but left him with more questions than answers. Each of the choices presented to him had alluring benefits, but also very serious drawbacks. Great clans, lesser clans, government, or independent. Sunny tried to imagine himself as a legacy and silently shook his head. All that prestige, all that wealth, the admiration of the masses, being a legacy meant being a part of the nobility, the elite above all elites. It was the exact opposite of what Sunny had been all his life. But who said that he had to remain the same in the future? From a pauper to a prince, that would be a nice transformation. Lord Sunless, that had a nice ring to it, didn't it? There were serious disadvantages to making such a choice, of course. Working for the government offered its own advantages, but at the cost of not receiving as much funds and resources, while being tied down by too many obligations. Both times Sunny had met Master Jet, she seemed busy and overworked. He couldn't imagine pursuing his goals with such a schedule. One of the functions of the awakened forces in service to the government was hunting down rogue members of their own kind. Awakened were people, after all, and there were criminals among them, too. Especially because many were traumatized and driven to the edge of madness by their experiences in the nightmares in the dream realm. If Sunny could absorb the essence of those humans he killed like all the other awakened, that path could have offered him a faster track to saturating his cores. But as it was, he didn't see himself putting on the uniform, unless there were new gates opening every day, thus providing him with the endless supply of nightmare creatures to hunt. By the way, how many gates were opening in a given year, on average? Suddenly, Sunny realized that he had no idea. The propaganda never mentioned concrete numbers, only the fact that Valiant Awakened had the situation under control. Did they, really? The last option was to remain independent. That choice was seemingly in contradiction to his desire to acquire status and as many benefits as possible, but only on the surface. In fact, Sunny had already received most of what he wanted by becoming a high-ranking citizen and getting a free pick of any citadel. Of course, not having the vast resources of a legacy clan or the government would be a huge loss. But it would also provide the best chance he had to keep all his secrets to himself. All three options were worthy of being considered. In the end, it all came to the fact that he simply didn't have enough information to make a decision. So, getting information was his first priority. But, how? What was it called? A library. The academy has to have one of those, right? Sunny, of course, had never been to a library, except for the ancient ruin in the Dark City, but he was familiar with the concept. There were similar types of public terminals in the outskirts, too, although using them cost credits. He had never had any to spare, so his visits were few and far between. And he went there for entertainment, not to study. Now that Sunny had himself a state-of-the-art communicator, he could access a lot of information from the network, but doing so would doubtlessly leave a digital trail behind. Considering that some of the topics he wanted to research were rather dangerous, he wanted to remain as anonymous as possible. A library it is. 10 minutes later, he approached a square white building. Like most of the academy, its walls were made out of smooth, pristine alloy, with wide windows that could be covered at any moment with reinforced shutters. There weren't many people in sight, so Sunny assumed that the library was not a popular destination among the awakened. Why would it be, if most of the information stored there could be accessed remotely? He was the weirdo for coming here in person. Entering through an automatic door, Sunny looked around and blinked a couple of times. Everywhere he looked, tall shelves full of paper books stretched into the distance. Between them stood tables meant for study, with several young men and women reading behind them silently. Most of them were using terminals to take notes, but some were actually writing by hand. What the hell is that? All those books, of course, were printed on synthetic paper, but why have them printed at all? Wouldn't it be way more convenient to read from a terminal, like all normal people did? He had never seen a physical book in his life. The very idea of using one was mind-boggling. But then, it made sense. Digital data storage technology was highly advanced, but susceptible to various types of damage. During the Dark Times, which came before the even darker times of the Nightmare Spell, back when humanity had been consumed by an endless series of devastating wars and cataclysmic natural disasters, a lot of knowledge had been lost due to over-reliance on digital mediums. Whole layers of culture were irrevocably gone as the result. Paper was still the safest way to preserve knowledge. It's just Sunny had never thought about it before. Still weird. Trying to not show his confusion, Sunny furtively looked around and noticed a member of the library staff. It was a young man, no, wait, a young woman. A young person, with short black hair and intelligent brown eyes, who was currently reading a vintage-looking book. There was a badge on her chest, with the name, Ren, written on it. At least Sunny thought that it was a name. Maybe it was some weird title among the librarians. Who knew what kind of strange customs they had here? Approaching the young librarian, he stopped a couple of meters away and waited patiently to be noticed. However, Ren continued to read, fully engrossed in whatever story the book told, eyes full of deep emotion. Curious, Sunny looked at the title on the cover. Free Fall, sounds familiar. Must be a really great book. Maybe I should read it someday. Hey, can I get some directions? Ren lingered for a couple of seconds, then reluctantly put down the novel and looked at him with a neutral smile. Of course, how can I help you? He lingered for a bit, then said with uncertainty. How can I read about the Dream Realm and the current state of human expansion into its various regions? Ren blinked a couple of times, then asked politely. Can you be more specific? Sunny sighed. I want to see a map and a list of all the citadels out there, as well as learn who owns what and why. I guess. The librarian smiled brightly. You are a lover of history as well. Of course. You have come to the right place. We have all the records you'll ever need here. Nickel. Sunny flinched. Nickel. What does nickel mean? What is happening? Suddenly, another young librarian appeared out of nowhere. This one was definitely a guy, wearing a wrinkled white shirt and a brown vest. He was tall and handsome, with slightly disheveled red hair, scruffy bristle on his chin, and a friendly face. There was a badge on his vest, too, with the word, Nickel, written on it. The two were a strange pair. Nickel, could you please escort this young man to the Dream Realm history section? The tall librarian glanced at Sunny and gave him a wide smile. Sure, please, follow me. They headed into the depths of the library, leaving Ren behind. A few moments later, Sunny heard the rustle of paper pages coming from behind. The smaller librarian was once again engrossed in the book. Yeah, I should definitely check that novel out. A citizen of the 7th rank should be well read, right? Nickel led him through the library, asking a few questions to narrow down the search. Soon, they arrived in front of a particular set of shelves, full of books having to do with the Dream Realm and the history of humanity's slow exploration of it. The young man helped Sunny select a few, wished him luck, and disappeared as quietly and swiftly as he had appeared. Sunny looked at the spot where Nickel had been just a few moments ago, then slowly shook his head. A librarian, that guy could have been an assassin, instead. Well, maybe he was. Come to think about it, working in a library could be a perfect cover for clandestine operators. Maybe I should become a librarian, too. Making sure that no one was watching him, Sunny put his books on a nearby table and walked back to the shelves. There, he stared at a certain book that he had noticed a few minutes ago. Its title was simple, The Immortal Flame. Sunny hesitated for a bit, and then took the book off the shelf. He was pretty sure that the sovereigns were at least partially responsible for the fall of Nef's clan. If so, there had to be some hints of their identity in the history of the Immortal Flame. This has to be a good place to start looking for some answers, right? Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 367 to 367, Fog of Time. 1,373 words. Sunny brought the book back to the table and sat down, looking at the plain cover with a complicated expression. Of course, he knew a few things about the Immortal Flame clan. Everybody did, considering how prominent the achievements of its members were. Even though Sunny missed out on receiving a proper education, the legendary figures of Changing Star's father and grandfather had long ago found their way from the pages of history into the popular culture. Their names were pretty much synonymous with heroism and the indomitable nature of the human spirit, famously painted with a tinge of tragedy. Immortal Flame was the first awakened to become a master, and Broken Sword, his son-in-law, was the first master to become a saint. Of course, they had not done so alone, each had a group of powerful companions to share the burden of challenging the spell. So, a more proper statement would have been that they were the leaders of the first cohorts to conquer the second and third nightmares. However, the names of their comrades were not as well known. Sunny was sure that kids learned about them in school, but a street rat like him only had a general impression of who they were. Mostly, he just remembered that some of them would go on to establish the great clans. But that was the thing about heroes. Sunny had once told Effie that one had to die to become a hero, and that was not a joke. A person could possess renown and respect for achieving something incredible, but it was the act of making the ultimate sacrifice that elevated one to heroic status. That's why the Immortal Flame clan was revered much more than the other great clans, not only because the leaders of those cohorts came from it, but also because it had a tragic end. Or had it? If Neffis did manage to return to the real world, the fame of her clan would burn bright once again, perhaps even brighter than ever before. The survivors of the Dreamer army already treated her like a deity. With a sudden frown, Sunny awkwardly opened the book and started reading. Accustomed to reading off a screen, he struggled for a bit with the printed text, but then quickly got used to it and engrossed himself in the illustrious history of the famed clan. The first part was dedicated to Immortal Flame himself, and although it was interesting, there was not a lot of information there that Sunny could use. He already knew that Neff's grandfather had been among the first wave of people infected by the nightmare spell, and that he fought against the nightmare creatures during the initial mayhem that followed its appearance. Back then, millions of people were suddenly thrust into the first nightmares and died, resulting in millions of nightmare creatures entering the real world. Of course, almost all of them were only of the dormant rank, but even that turned out to be too much for the armies of the already reeling humanity to handle. Whole nations were destroyed, and for a while, the planet was submerged into absolute chaos. It was only thanks to people like Immortal Flame, who had not earned his true name yet back then, of course, that the situation changed. There were those who had survived the first nightmare, then entered the dream realm and carved their path to gateways. After returning to the real world, they united and fought back against the tide of nightmare creatures, eventually establishing a new world order. The one that existed to this day. They were tough people. Becoming an awakened was hard enough even today, with all the accumulated knowledge about the spell being freely accessible to everyone. Back when it first appeared, people like Immortal Flame didn't know anything. They didn't know what an aspect was, how many ranks and classes of the nightmare creatures were there, what they meant, what the memories and echoes were, what a gateway was. Most important of all, they didn't even know if saving humanity was even possible. And yet, somehow, they learned and fought back. Sunny couldn't imagine how dark and hellish that time must have been. Truly, they deserved his respect. But, sadly, they didn't deserve his time. At least not now. He had much more pressing things on his plate, so Sunny just skimmed through the pages describing Immortal Flame's life, his eventual triumph over the second nightmare, and heroic death. The legendary master died defending the evacuating cities from the onslaught of terrible creatures that entered the real world through a Category 5 gate. That happened just a year or so before Sunny was born, and had cost humanity an entire continent. It was also the event that led to Neff's mother becoming hollow, although that tragedy was not described in the book in great detail. All that was said about it was that Smile of Heaven died during the disaster while protecting civilians. Sunny sighed, then concentrated on reading about Broken Sword. Neff's father was not a legacy by birth. In fact, he came from a very humble background, and rose from absolute obscurity to the very pinnacle of prominence thanks only to his talent and battle genius. He was a pauper who had won the heart of a princess and became the heir of the most venerated clan in human history. The narrative of the book framed the history in a way that suggested that Broken Sword had been heartbroken by the death of his wife, and that it was this loss that drove him to rise even higher and challenge the third nightmare. Miraculously, Broken Sword succeeded, becoming the first saint. There was no happy end to his story, though. Just a few years later, he perished in the dream realm while exploring a region that would later be categorized as a death zone. The book ended with a long-winded tribute to the two legendary heroes and an explanation of how important their contributions were to the survival and future prosperity of the human race. Sunny closed the book and shook his head. Single quote ... What a load of crap. He might not have been educated, but like most people in the outskirts, Sunny had the instinctive skill of recognizing propaganda and reading between the lines of official statements. And this was what the book was, an embellished, partially fictional version of events that the government liked to feed to people. The truth was hard to come by. There were several things about the supposed history of the Immortal Flame clan that didn't make a lot of sense to Sunny. The first one was the circumstances of Smile of Heaven's tragic death. On paper, everything seemed fine, but Sunny knew that she was not, in fact, dead, not in the traditional sense of the word, at least. She was hollow, but how could she become hollow? According to the book, at that point in time, Broken Sword had already become a master. The two of them were partners both in life and in battle, leading their cohort together. That would suggest that Smile of Heaven was a master, too. But masters traveled to the dream realm physically as opposed to in spirit, like sleepers and awakened did. There would have been no soulless body left behind if she had died there, so, how is it possible? The timeline doesn't add up. The second questionable point was Broken Sword's own death. Saints were extremely powerful beings, and killing one was not an easy task. Even when met with an overwhelming foe, a saint should have been able to at least escape. Saints simply did not die unless they had a reason to stand their ground and fight to the last breath. The only creatures that could kill them instantly were too powerful and rare to stumble on one randomly, even when exploring an unknown region of the dream realm. Would Broken Sword have been so reckless and stubborn, knowing that he had a daughter who needed his care and protection? The legendary swordsman didn't strike Sunny as someone who would allow himself to die easily, unless some other forces were involved. And finally, there were the other members of his cohort. Sunny whispered their names: Broken Sword, Smile of Heaven, Astarion, Kisong, Anvil of the Valor clan. Astarion, Kisong, Anvil of Valor. Aster, Song, Veil. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 368 to 368. Aster, Song, Veil. 1,463 words. Sunny spent several hours reading the book about the history of the Immortal Clan book, and now, finally, he was starting to feel sleepy. Not to the point of needing to use the stimulants provided to him by Master Jet, but enough to make it harder for him to concentrate. Rubbing his face, he mentally repeated the names of Broken Sword's companions, the brilliant warriors who had become the first saints of the human race. Astarion, Ki Song, Anvil of the Valor Clan. Were they the Aster, Song, and Vale? While not exactly the same, the names of the members of the legendary cohort were too similar to the 3 words that Nefis had once told him to never say out loud, among a couple of others, to be merely a coincidence. Let's see, what do I really know about all that stuff? Sunny knew that the 3 words held enough meaning to free Nef from the haze of the Soul Devourer's mind hex, at least partially. She had reacted to them very strongly, so much so that Sunny had actually been afraid for his life for a bit there. She had also asked him a strange question. He repeated it mentally, careful to not say anything out loud. Which domain do you belong to? Sunny had no idea what a capital letter domain was back then, and he didn't know now. But he was, indeed, sure that there was a capital letter there. He also suspected that people who had been trying to kill Nefis for most of her life were connected to these mysterious domains. Which meant that Castor had been, too. From that, it wasn't hard to conclude that domains and sovereigns, who apparently willed the destruction of the Immortal Flame clan, were tied together or more likely the same. And all of it had something to do with lineage memories and the attributes they bestowed, like the fire attribute that was described as the lineage of the sun god. Or his own blood weave, which was apparently both incomplete and forbidden. Sunny massaged his temples and sighed. For a long time, he had no clue about what Aster, Song, and Vale meant. But after meeting Seishan, an adopted daughter of the great clan Song, he began to suspect that they were the names of the 3 legacy clans responsible for the numerous attempts on Nef's life, and maybe even the deaths of her parents and the downfall of the Immortal Flame clan. Not only because of his inherent dislike of legacies, but also because of how peculiar Changing Star had described her relationship with the Handmaiden. Trusted, not really, never, actually. Why would Nefis say that she would never, ever trust Seishan? Maybe it was because Seishan belonged to one of the clans responsible for the undoing of her family. That was a logical assumption. But now, Sunny saw that, maybe, he was wrong. Maybe Aster, Song, and Vale weren't the names of clans, maybe, these were the nicknames belonging to 3 people. Astarion, Ki Song, and Anvil of Clan Valor. They were Broken Sword's companions, and as such, Nefis had to have met them a lot before her father died. Neither Broken Sword himself nor his daughter would have been addressing them by their full names, either. What would she call them? Uncle Aster, Auntie Song. Sunny looked down, a dark expression appearing on his face. If these were really the people that had later sent numerous assassins to hunt down the little girl who trusted them, then the hatred Nefis had for them would be easy to explain. It would also be easy to explain how a saint of Broken Sword's talent and might had died. Maybe he had been stabbed in the back by the people he trusted the most. Even though there was no proof, it all made too much sense. Sunny felt that he was on the right track. But how were Astarion, Ki Song, and Anvil of Clan Valor connected to the mysterious sovereigns? Did they serve them, or? His eyes widened. A terrible suspicion entered his mind. Not a suspicion. A certainty. Single quote ... It's them. They are the sovereigns. The revelation hit him like a hurricane squall, too vast to comprehend all at once. And the key to it was a simple sentence that Nefis had once told him while overwhelmed by intense emotions. How did he miss it? Back when they had their falling out in a deserted alley of the outer settlement, Nef said. Single quote ... You think Gunlog can stop me? You think a fallen terror can stop me? Those 3 ghouls can stop me? No, Sunny, nothing will stop me. Anyone who dares will die. I'll kill them all. She had listed her enemies. She listed them in the order of magnitude. First Gunlog, then the Crimson Terror. And then, the sovereigns. 3 ghouls, Aster, Song, and Vale. Just as he was trying to cope with that idea, another frightening realization appeared in Sunny's mind. He shuddered, recalling another thing that Nefis had said. He then mumbled quietly. Single quote ... No, I won't be the first one to conquer the 4th nightmare. I will be the first one to conquer every nightmare. Back then, he had understood her as wishing to be the first one to beat the 4th nightmare, as well as all the rest. But her words could have been interpreted in a different way. Among the awakened, there was a general agreement that the names of the ranks were not coincidental. Many people thought that the words used by the spell described the ascent toward godhood, or the descent into profanity as far as nightmare creatures were concerned. In many ways, these 2 paths were reflections of each other. A person of a 3rd rank was described as ascended, since they were rising above their human nature. A creature of the same rank was called fallen. This step had to do with ascension, or the opposite of it. A person of the 4th rank was described as transcendent, since they had transcended the mundane and assumed some qualities of the divine. A creature of the same rank was called corrupted. This step had to do with transformation. It was no coincidence that the aspect ability the saints received was called the transformation ability, after all. The next step also had a special meaning to it. It represented authority and reign. Be it supreme or great, beings of that level were meant to consolidate their power and exert it upon the world. The 5th step of the class hierarchy was much the same, allowing nightmare creatures to create and control armies of lesser minions. Such creatures were called tyrants. What would a human who had reached the supreme rank be called, then? Sunny trembled. A sovereign. Nefis had not meant that she would not only be the first human to conquer the 4th nightmare, but also all the rest. She had meant that she would be first to conquer the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. Because the 4th nightmare had already been conquered. Gods, Key of the Great Clan Song, Anvil of the Great Clan Valor, and a person called Astarion had conquered it. And Broken Sword of the Immortal Flame. Broken Sword had been mysteriously killed in the process. Aster, Song, and Vale had returned from the 4th nightmare wreathed in new authority, while Broken Sword perished. What was a domain? Possibly the expression of the 5th aspect ability they had received, a special one, just like the special transformation ability the saints possessed. And, for some reason, they had chosen to keep their accomplishment a secret, instead exerting their influence on humanity from the shadows. Wasn't it strange, that their names seemed to practically disappear from the pages of history after Broken Sword died? They, too, were the first to become saints, after all. Not if they had chosen to keep them hidden. Wasn't it strange that Castor of Hanli clan seemed so loyal to the mysterious sovereigns who had ordered him to kill the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan? Not if they were the real power behind the great legacy clans, to which his own lesser clan was beholden. Wasn't it hard to believe that there were words that could kill just by becoming known to a person? Not if those words were the names of the 3 supreme rulers that preferred to remain nameless. Sunny groaned slightly, then covered his face with his hands. Single quote. Crap, 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 why did I have to go and get myself involved in all this crap? He had a feeling that his life had just become much more complicated. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 369 to 369, Hidden Forces. 1163 words. Sunny spent some time staring at the pile of books in front of him with a dark expression. After a while, he sighed heavily. So, there were hidden forces out there that exerted influence over the entire human race. The authority was as invisible as it was frightening. And now, he knew their names. The sovereigns were at least as powerful as the government, or maybe even more so. The exact relationship between these two hegemonic powers, one official, the other secretive, was not clear, but for now, knowing the full extent of the authority resting in the hands of the sovereigns was not that important. However, it was important to know that the world was not at all as he had imagined. It was much more dangerous. Why? Because if there was one thing that all wielders of authority shared, it was the animosity toward others encroaching on their power. That was just human nature. Among the strong, only one entity could be the strongest. And so, that entity was always apprehensive of others growing stronger. Bosses of criminal gangs in the outskirts were always paranoid of their lieutenants usurping them, and tended to violently get rid of those who were too successful. In the Dark City, Gunlog reigned with an iron fist, destroying anyone who dared to be strong without submitting to his rule. And sovereigns would be much the same. Since Sunny was already powerful beyond reason, for a person of his age at least, and had an even more frightening potential, the sovereigns would never allow him to exist outside their control. Luckily, they did not know the true extent of his strength yet. But since his main goal was to become stronger, as strong as he possibly could, as fast as he possibly could, to not fall behind Neffis, that was going to be a problem. Suddenly, some things about the awakened society became more clear. A long time ago, Sunny had learned that Master Jet had no chance of ever becoming a saint. Apparently, one had to have a team of outstanding companions and a lot of support to attempt conquering the third nightmare, and she lacked both due to her problematic personality. Would sovereigns allow someone outside their grasp to become a saint? Most resources and knowledge about the Dream Realm belonged to the legacy clans, especially when it came to anything having to do with higher ranks. And the clans were controlled by the sovereigns, which basically meant that they could prevent anyone from becoming a saint simply by refusing their support. How many talented masters like Jet were being suppressed from growing more powerful because they didn't serve one of the supremes? There were a couple of saints serving the government, at least. Who were they really loyal to? Hate it, I hate it so much. Of course, Sunny knew that all of this was just his conjecture. And yet, one thing was certain, the choice presented to him by Master Jet was not as straightforward as he had thought. In truth, he wasn't deciding between the great clans, the lesser clans, the government, and independence. He was deciding between entering into the service to the sovereigns or refusing it. And that choice was strained even further by his connection to Changing Star. Single quote. Damnation. With a sigh, Sunny stared at the bookshelf surrounding him, and then stood up. He had to get a few more books to read. Many hours later, he tiredly put the last one away and rubbed his face. Now that he had absorbed a lot of knowledge about the current geography and situation of the Dream Realm, a seed of a plan began to form in his mind. However, he still needed more information. He wouldn't be able to find it here, however. For that, he would have to visit an old acquaintance. One thing he did find, nevertheless, was a bit more information about the sovereigns. Astarion, Kisong, and Anvil of Valor. The last one was possibly the most renowned. An heir of the Great Clan, he was mentioned many times in the texts describing the human expansion into the northern territories of the Dream Realm, as well as the history of Bastion, one of the 3 central human citadels in the Dream Realm. In fact, he had apparently been responsible for slaying the Titan whose remains were then used to create the chair Sunny was currently sitting on. Strong. Later, though, the traces of Saint Anvil disappeared. There was no mention of his death, but the reins of Clan Valor were now in the hands of his cousins, at least officially. Kisong was only slightly less famous. Unlike Anvil of Valor, she had come from one of the lesser legacy clans, and it was by her hand that it was elevated to the status of a great one. The stronghold of Clan Song, Ravenheart, was the second major human settlement in the Dream Realm. Its sphere of influence was separated from the other 2 territories by especially dreadful regions. The border with the Valor clan was especially deadly, but also rather thin. From what Sunny was able to learn, Kisong was still the ruler of her clan, although she rarely appeared in public. She was known as a benevolent and charitable person, but that was pretty much all the information he could find. It seemed that it was her adoptive daughters who mostly acted on her behalf. Sishan was one of them, although she was trapped on the Forgotten Shore for too long to be mentioned anywhere. And lastly, there was a man named Astarion. He was the most mysterious of the 3. No one seemed to know where he came from and where he went after the Broken Swords cohort was disbanded. In fact, there was barely any mention of him at all. Astarion was not connected to the 3rd Great Legacy clan, at least from the looks of it. Or any lesser clan, for that matter. Sunny couldn't even find out when and where he had been born, let alone if he was still alive. Even in the texts describing the deeds of Broken Sword and his companions, the name Astarion was only mentioned in passing, as though he had never made any important contributions. Sunny shook his head and scowled. Let me guess, he's the most terrifying of the 3. That was an easy conclusion to make, because it took one to know one. Sunny himself was barely mentioned and tended to hide his contributions. My head hurts. The worst part was that this was only half of all the research he had to do. He had learned enough about the human position in the Dream Realm and the sovereigns. Now, he had to learn as much as he could about the gods, the demons, and the unknown. It was time to pay teacher Julius a visit. Of course, Sunny couldn't visit his old instructor with empty hands. Pushing the books aside, he activated the terminal embedded into the table, lingered for a few moments, and then typed. Quote. All of the Forgotten Shore is separated into 3 parts, one of which. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 370 to 370, Exploration Report. 984 words. It took Sunny the rest of the night to compile all of the information he had gathered about the Forgotten Shore into a succinct, comprehensive report. Knowing how passionate teacher Julius was about researching the Dream Realm, Sunny tried not to miss any important detail. He had described the geography and environment of the region to the best of his ability, including all the notable landmarks he visited or heard about, as well as the peculiar nature of the Dark Sea and the Labyrinth. He also described most of the nightmare creatures he had seen, met, or fought, writing down everything he knew about their powers, behavior, and weaknesses, writing through the lens of his own experience where he could. When possible, he included the information received directly from the spell, complete with the descriptions of memories and echoes he knew about. Of course, he provided those texts both in the human tongue and in the runic language. Lastly, he had written down the results of his exploration and studies into the history of the Forgotten Shore, describing in detail every engraving, every mosaic, and every mural he had seen. He also added his theories about what had happened to the ancient civilization, as well as his observations on how the ancient people of the Forgotten Shore had lived before the fall. Of course, there were things that he had kept to himself. Sunny omitted anything having to do with the nest of the vile thieving bird, the weaver, and the underground chamber beneath the ruined cathedral. He did not mention the stone saint, firstly because he wanted to keep her existence a secret, and secondly because she was connected to the unknown. He also avoided mentioning his battle against the coral golems and the banishment of the cursed sea, as well as the eventual fate of the Crimson Terror and the destruction of both the artificial sun and the spire itself. As far as everyone was concerned, Sunny had left through the gateway with the rest of the dreamers. No one had paid attention to his whereabouts in those last minutes, and he wanted to keep it that way. Well, no one except for Effie and Cassie, but he was reasonably sure that they would be discreet about certain things. And even if they failed to keep their lips sealed, Sunny had ways to explain his actions without revealing the truth. Finishing the report, Sunny leaned tiredly on the back of his chair and glanced at the screen. There, a long title was shown. Exploration Report on the Forgotten Shore, by Awakened Sunless. I think that's good enough. Sunny had no idea how to write an academic paper, or a proper field report, for that matter. So he had written and structured this document in a way that would have been the most helpful for his younger self a year ago, when he had entered the Forgotten Shore without knowing anything about it. A manual such as this would have made so many things easier. With a sigh, Sunny sent the report to his communicator, then turned off the terminal and stood up. Stretching his tired body, he swayed a little and yawned. It was already 2 days since his return to the real world, so the fatigue was slowly accumulating. Soon, he would have to start using the stimulants provided to him by Master Jet, but that moment had not come yet. Sunny walked away from the table, then hesitated a little and came back. Picking up several books from the orderly pile, he returned them to the proper shelves. After every book was back to its intended place, he nodded with satisfaction and finally left the library. What a fascinating place. I like it there. Looking back at the unassuming building, Sunny breathed in the cold winter air and remembered the description of Weaver's mask. Weaver believed that knowledge was the origin of power, and so always hid behind numerous lies. What would the demon of fate think about this place? It was, after all, a palace of knowledge. Sunny remembered the deceptive pages that presented a washed, polished version of history and smiled. Yeah, but it is also a palace of lies. It was weird returning to the sleeper compound. The low, fortified building was much like he remembered, only weighed down by more snow. Sunny had not spent a lot of time here, but those days before the winter solstice were some of the most memorable in his life. So much excitement, so much dread. Who knew that he would not see it again for more than a year? Entering the familiar hall, he looked around, half expecting to see a crowd of nervous sleepers. But, of course, there was no one around. Everyone had already left for their first venture into the dream realm, and it was too early for the next year's dreamers to arrive. Walking through the empty halls, he found his way to the lower levels of the compound and approached the wilderness survival classroom, which also served as teacher Julius's office. Opening the door, he saw the spacious and tastefully decorated room where he had spent most of his short stay at the academy. Suddenly, Sunny was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia. Single quote. Are you crazy? You're too young to be nostalgic about the good old days. His mentor was not at his usual place, sitting behind the wide wooden desk. Instead, the old man was standing in front of a glass case, studying the skull of a ferocious creature stored inside and taking notes. He hadn't changed at all. Teacher Julius was still old, with messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes, and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to have a life of their own. His posture and expression were full of quiet melancholy. However, as soon as he heard someone entering the classroom, his face changed, becoming lively and curious once again. Turning around, the old man stared at the visitor with confusion. Then, his face suddenly lit up with a bright, infectious smile. Sunny, my boy, share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 371 to 371, Academic Achievement. 1,349 words. Teacher Julius was just the same, but Sunny's perception of him had changed. Not only because of how instrumental the things he had learned from the old instructor turned out to be for his survival, but also because of the history books he had just read. How old is Teacher Julius, anyway? Sunny had never thought about it, but after learning more about Immortal Flame and the first generation of the Awakened, he couldn't help but see his mentor in a new light. Teacher Julius must have been if not of the same age as those legendary figures, then at least of the same generation. Those people had lived through much darker, much more violent times. They had survived the end of the world, and built a new one from the ruins. Quote. Sunny, my boy. Before Sunny could react properly, he was subjected to a passionate hug. Then, Teacher Julius unceremoniously pushed him to the nearest chair. Finally, you're back. I never doubted that you would return, not even for a moment. No student of mine would allow himself to die easily, you know. Wait, what am I talking about? Of course, you know. You're one of my students yourself, after all. Sunny couldn't help but smile while listening to the excitement in the old man's voice. Before coming here, he was slightly worried that Teacher Julius would not even remember him. Despite the fact that his course was not the most popular at the academy, the eccentric instructor must have mentored thousands of sleepers throughout his career. What was one more? But, luckily, Sunny had been wrong. But, my boy, a whole year. Did you like it in the dream realm so much that you didn't want to return? Did you not think that your old teacher would be worried sick? In the name of the gods, what happened? Sunny hesitated a little, then said apologetically. Well, Teacher Julius, you see, I ended up in an unexplored region of the dream realm. And the only gateway there was guarded by a fallen terror. The old man blinked. Heavens, how horrible. So what did you do? Sunny shrugged. Well, in short, I met two beautiful girls, escorted them to an ancient castle, spent a few months exploring a cursed city, went on a long and arduous quest to find a magic crown, killed a devil, helped a princess become a queen, participated in a war or two, climbed an evil tower, and finally ended up near the gateway. Basically, I survived, just how you taught me to. Teacher Julius listened to him very carefully, then nodded a few times. Great, you did great, just as expected from one of my students. But, Sunny, the old man's eyes suddenly shone brightly, full of excitement. Did you say something about an unexplored region? Sunny smiled, then activated his communicator. I did. In fact, I have compiled a lengthy report about things I have seen, fought, and discovered there. Would you like to take a look? I can send it to you. Teacher Julius looked down with embarrassment. A report? Oh, you shouldn't have. You must be so terribly busy right now. However, even while he was saying that, the old man was already opening the file. As soon as he started reading, his eyes widened, and a delighted smile appeared on his face. Brilliant. This is brilliant. Wait, what's that? You even remembered to include citations in the original runic. That's my boy. Marvelous. Well-preserved ruins. A whole city. Is there a? There is. Oh, my. It took Teacher Julius some time to skim through the report. Throughout the whole process, he continued to mumble under his nose in an increasingly excited tone. Some remarks Sunny understood, while some went completely over his head. Like, Greystone architecture, possible connections to the third wandering archon. Or, which era of the Babel script would that correspond to? Or, rats, that'll show that smug bastard Sando how wrong his universal origin of rituals ramblings were. The old man's eyes gradually grew wider and wider. Finally, he deactivated his communicator and looked at Sunny with an expression of profound exhilaration. You've done exceptionally well, Sunny. Of course, your report is rough around the edges and needs a lot of work to be published, but this is going to make so many people happy. I can name at least a dozen theories that can be expanded, confirmed, or refuted thanks to all the new data you provided. And that's just off the top of my head, not to mention all the good that will come from the detailed descriptions of so many new types of nightmare creatures you included. Teacher Julius smiled proudly. You truly have a heart of an explorer, my boy. Very few people do, and out of those, even less have a keen mind such as yours. Not to mention the ability to venture into the deadly expanse of the dream realm and not only come back alive, but also remember to look at more than just what's in front of them. But it is thanks to such people that we can deepen our knowledge of the spell. He sighed. Most of the awakened only know how to hack and slash. They tend to look at us with very little regard, but it is only because of us that they know how to hack and where to slash. Luckily, there are few bright minds here and there. Sunny stared at his mentor with a bit of surprise. He had not expected such an intense reaction. He just wrote down his findings about the Forgotten Shore to please the old man, considering they shared a hobby. I'm sorry. Published. What do you mean by that, exactly? Teacher Julius glanced at him with a humorous spark in his eyes. Oh, don't worry. This old man is not going to rob his own student of the reward. I'll help you bring this paper to a proper state free of charge. I don't even need to be put down as a co-author, although it would make me happy if you did. What do I need money for? I have more money than I could ever spend already. Sunny tilted his head, then blinked a couple of times. His heart was suddenly grasped by burning emotions. Excuse me, Teacher Julius. But, did you say something about money? The old man stared at him with confusion. Yes, I did. Isn't it why you have compiled this marvelous report? To receive the contribution points from the government. Sunny lingered for a bit, then slowly shook his head. No, I just thought you would like to read it. I don't even know what these contribution points you mentioned are. Teacher Julius looked at him for a while, then burst out laughing. Oh my, what a good student I have. You really delighted me today, Sunny. Such pure dedication to the noble calling of an explorer. I wish more people were as selfless as you. Selfless? What do you mean selfless? There's not a single selfless bone in my body. Is there really money to be made from my stupid report? The old man shook his head and said, the government rewards those who enrich the base of knowledge we have about the spell, the dream realm, and the nightmare creatures quite generously. The more rare and more vital the information you submit is, the more contribution points you receive. These points can then be exchanged for a variety of useful things, or simply turned into credits. Considering that no one has ever explored the Forgotten Shore before, and how comprehensive your report is, I'd say you'll receive a pretty sizable sum. You really didn't know this? Sunny slowly shook his head. How sizable are we talking? Like if I want to rent an apartment? No, a house. If I want to rent a house in an area of the city with clean air, how many weeks would this reward buy? Teacher Julius gave him a strange look. Rent a house? What a strange example. Sunny, with how unique the data you contributed is, you don't need to rent a house. Wouldn't it be easier to just buy one? Sunny couldn't respond immediately, though. He was in the process of falling out of his chair. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 372 to 372, Names of the Gods. 989 words. After a while, he regained enough composure to continue the conversation. Sunny and Teacher Julius chatted for a while, discussing the exact process of publishing the report, what changes would have to be made, and how they would work together to bring the project to fruition. All of it, of course, was going to have to happen only after Sunny had settled in the dream realm and found a citadel to anchor himself to. Right now, he did not exactly have time to work on an academic paper. Teacher Julius also shared some of his knowledge about the human settlements in the dream realm and his views on how to decide on a proper citadel. All his advice, however, could be described in one sentence. Find one with good plumbing. Sunny wasn't sure what to make of it, but judging by the pained expression on the old man's face, it was indeed an important factor. Finally, he managed to turn the conversation toward the things he really wanted to learn about. Speaking of that, I am really unclear on one thing. While exploring the Dark City, I found a few places of worship. However, the deities they worshipped seemed to be different from the ones I heard about in my first nightmare. Did the native humans of the dream realm all have different gods? Teacher Julius looked at him and smiled. Ah, the gods. That is an interesting subject indeed. He thought for a few moments, then said, yes and no. The gods worshipped in different regions had different names, but from what we can tell, those names all describe the same entities. The current consensus is that the gods of the dream realm were, in fact, actual beings, perhaps creatures of the divine rank. Sunny nodded. Really? Then, where are they now? The old man sighed. That is the strange thing about the gods. They are dead, just like everything else in the dream realm is dead. They seem to have been alive in the time periods of many of the nightmares, but the ruins we have encountered and explored mostly describe them as being destroyed, by what or whom, we do not know. We also don't know if they existed before or after the nightmare spell itself appeared. He lingered for a bit, then added, but we do know a few things about the gods. For example, how many of them there were. Sunny smiled. Let me guess, 7. Teacher Julius chuckled. You would think that, right? But no, there were only 6 gods. Their most common names were Sun, War, Beast, Storm, Heart, and Shadow. Although those names don't do them justice, truth be told. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Really? How so? His mentor rubbed his chin, then said doubtfully. Well, a god is too vast of a being to be described with one word. Take the goddess of war. Oh, yes, their gender seems to be very mercurial. The war god is supposed to be the deity of warfare, and in a sense, he, or she, is. But he is also the god of life. What? How does it make any sense? The old man smiled. War is synonymous with struggle, and what is life if not a constant struggle for survival? So the goddess of war can also be called the goddess of life. She is also the goddess of progress, technology, craft, intellect, and through all of this, the patron goddess of humanity. Teacher Julius got engrossed in his favorite field and went on a small tangent. Or take the beast god. He is also often described as the goddess of the moon, as well as hunting, carnal desire, blood, beauty, and the cycle of birth and death. The sun god is also the lord of light, a manifestation of fire, passion, creation, and destruction. The storm god is also the god of the depths, of the oceans, of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. And so on. Sunny coughed. What about shadow god? The eccentric instructor shrugged. I'm not too familiar with that one. As far as gods go, shadow is not very prominent. Well, as a shadow should be, I guess. He is sometimes called the god of peace, death, solace, and mysteries. That's about it, I think. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then asked carefully. I see. Hard to imagine that only 6 entities were responsible for all that. Were there perhaps any other divine beings? Teacher Julius thought for a few moments, then shrugged. There certainly were many beings that were either partially divine, or even almost as powerful as the gods themselves. We don't know much about them, though. Take demons, for example. Sunny held his breath. Demons were such mysterious creatures. They were described as having power almost equal to that of the gods, but of a different nature. They also seem to have created themselves, or at least appeared out of nowhere. Almost nothing is known about them, except for the fact that there were 7 of them. One more terrible than the other. He raised an eyebrow. Terrible. Why were they terrible? The old man smiled. What can be more terrifying than a creature that came out of nowhere, wielding enough power to wage war against the heavens? Don't forget that what humans fear the most is the unknown. Perhaps the gods were much the same. Sunny hesitated for a long time, then finally asked. Teacher Julius, have you ever heard about the unknown? His mentor gave him a weird look, then laughed. What kind of a question is that? Haven't I dedicated my whole life to exploring the unknown? I think the lack of sleep is getting to you, my boy. Come, I have wasted enough of your time. A newly awakened like you should be running around, trying to find patronage or ingratiate themselves to a welcoming clan. I'll recommend you several books on the gods and divinity, to read once you have settled out there in the dream realm. Sunny smiled weakly, realizing that Teacher Julius did not know anything about the Weaver, the reasons for why the gods were dead, and the unknown. Strangely, he felt relieved. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 373 to 373, Reunited. 1009 words. Leaving the sleeper compound, Sunny felt as though even the winter cold could not keep him from feeling sleepy anymore. Wondering what time it was, he looked up out of habit and glanced at the sun. The sun was all wrong. Suddenly, Sunny was wide awake, his hand instinctively outstretched to summon the midnight shard. It took him a few moments to recognize his error. Oh, the sun is normal. It's just not the same as on the Forgotten Shore. He also didn't have to measure time by observing the sky anymore. He had a communicator that could show him what time of day it was, up to the exact nanosecond. Shaking his head, Sunny headed back toward the hospital complex. He was late for a memorial. Of sorts, the survivors of the Dreamer Army were supposed to gather today to celebrate those who remained alive and remember those who had fallen. Entering the medical center, he headed toward the conference hall, but then lingered for a moment in front of a monitor attached to the wall. There, 100 names were shown, listing everyone who had made it back. And on the very top of it, there were 3 very special ones. Raised by Wolves, Nightingale, Song of the Fallen, Effie, Kai, and Cassie. Sunny stared at the 3 true names for some time, then slowly lowered his gaze. Right beneath was his own name. With a grim expression on his face, Sunny opened the doors and entered the hall. The former sleepers of the Forgotten Shore were all there, at least those who had awoken at the academy or could make it there for the memorial. He looked around the crowd, searching for familiar faces. It was strange to see all these people back in the real world. Especially without Neffis. Now that they were out of danger and had lost their leader, there wasn't a lot to keep them together and so much to split them apart. Before, they were united by necessity and the irresistible will of changing star. Now, nothing remained to prevent the old grievances from pulling them apart. And yet, the 100 survivors seemed strangely united. Perhaps it was the shared trauma of their harrowing experience in the dream realm, or something else that Sunny couldn't quite understand, but there was no division between them. On the contrary, every awakened gathered in the hall seemed to share an invisible bond with all the others. Single quote. Weird. Many people welcomed his arrival with warm greetings. Sunny smiled awkwardly and did his best to reciprocate their goodwill. After a few such encounters, he finally noticed Kai at the back of the crowd. Sunny stumbled and stared at his friend for a couple of seconds. I'll be damned, how could that guy become even more gorgeous? The awakening made Kai's slender figure even more graceful, his perfect face even more handsome, and his electric green eyes even more mesmerizing. His luscious dark auburn hair was now neatly cut and styled, his clothes were simple and exquisitely fashionable, and the several pieces of jewelry he wore somehow managed to enhance every one of those features by bringing it just the right amount of attention. Such injustice. With a resentful sigh, Sunny made his way through the crowd and approached his friend. Kai noticed him from afar, and then, the conference hall suddenly seemed to become much brighter due to his brilliant smile. Sunny, you are finally here. Sunny wanted to answer, but then froze for a second, noticing a stranger next to the charming young man. A sickly, terribly gaunt young woman was sitting in a wheelchair, staring at them with a tired expression. There was clearly something defective about her body. She was unhealthily thin, with pale skin stretching over brittle bones and a strange twist to her spine. Her legs seemed lifeless and weak, tucked awkwardly on the step of her wheelchair. Her neck was clearly struggling to support the weight of her head. It was only when the young woman smiled mischievously did he finally recognize her. What's the matter, doofus? You've been struck dumb by my beauty. With a giggle, Effie spun her wheelchair, as though giving him the chance to take a good look. Effie, that's Effie. Sunny stared at her for a couple of moments, trying to connect the image of the mighty huntress he knew, tall, strong, beautiful, and full of vigor, to this weak, gaunt young woman. He only spoke when the pain of the flaw pierced his mind. Not really. What the hell happened to you? Effie smiled and shrugged. Nothing. That's how I've always been, in the real world. Something moved in Sunny's memory. He remembered how the two of them sat on the support beam of the ruined cathedral, talking in whispers. For some of us, the real world was more of a hell than the dream realm. That was what Effie had said, back then. Noticing the strange expression on his face, she grinned. Ah, don't worry about it. At least now that I'm awakened, I can move my hands. Look at this. She grabbed the handles of the wheels, then balanced her chair at an angle and spun it around again. See, ain't that the coolest thing you've ever seen? Sunny hesitated for a bit, then said quietly. Quote. Yes, one of the coolest, by far. Effie gave him a smile, then glanced at Kai. See, Knight, your celebrity aura got nothing on my burning charisma. The young man looked at her, but didn't say anything. Instead, he suddenly took a step forward and gave Sunny a big hug. Sunny, thank gods you're alive. Sunny squirmed a little, but then surrendered to being embraced. With a resigned expression, he endured for as long as he could and then said through gritted teeth. Why shouldn't I be alive, fool? I wasn't the one whose unconscious, lanky body had to be dragged all the way to the gateway. Kai squeezed him even tighter, then finally released his hold on him. Taking a step back, the charming young man hesitated for a couple of seconds and sighed. Still, with your luck, I am surprised that the whole spire didn't just fall on your head. Sunny froze, then forced out a smile. Yeah, that would have been terrible, wouldn't it? Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 374 to 374, Dinner with Friends. 1009 words. Soon, several instructors appeared. In a solemn and sonorous atmosphere, each of them gave a small speech, congratulating the survivors of the Dreamer Army on overcoming the immeasurable hardships and returning to the real world alive. They also spoke about those who had fallen, and offered words of solace, saying that their sacrifice would not be forgotten by mankind. After all, mankind only continued to exist because of young men and women like them. To Sunny, those words rang hollow and empty, but they affected many people in the crowd. He saw a few people crying, the others trying to keep a brave face. Everyone had lost a friend, a companion, or a loved one during the tumultuous last days on the Forgotten Shore. Finally, Instructor Rock took the stage and spoke in length about the meaning of being an awakened, their duty to safeguard humanity, and what they should do and expect in the next few days. However, at some point, he was interrupted. Lady Neffes, tell us what happened to her. A hum of voices rose above the crowd, everyone joining in that plea. Instructor Rock sighed. Calm down, awakened. I'll tell you everything we know. The survivors of the Dreamer Army grew silent, staring at him with piercing intensity. The mighty man hesitated for a few seconds, then said, as all of you know by now, the gateway of the Forgotten Shore seemed to have been destroyed. Changing Star, who took it upon herself to distract the fallen terror to allow her people to escape, did not make it through in time. A heavy, tortured tension hung in the air. The young men and women gathered in the hall kept silent, but their faces betrayed the storm of painful emotions raging in their hearts. Instructor Rock continued. However, she is still alive out there, in the dream realm. Her vital signs and brain activity readings are all stable. It seems that Lady Neffes managed to escape the terror, at least. He didn't need to say the rest. Everyone understood what it meant. She was trapped in the dream realm, with no way to come back. Sunny glanced at the newly awakened around him, wondering what their reaction would be. Guilt, sorrow, fury. However, he was surprised by what he saw. A few moments later, a voice resounded from the crowd, full of adamant belief. She will return. If anyone can do it, it's Lady Neffes. A wave of voices then joined that first one, all expressing their agreement. That's right, she is Changing Star of the Immortal Flame. She won't die. Who says that she escaped from the terror? I bet that Lady Neffes is currently roasting its meat, looking at a map and thinking where to find another gateway. Exactly. Immortal Flame cannot be extinguished. There was no guilt, sorrow, or fury. Only hope, only faith. Uncomfortable, Sunny turned to Effie and Kai. Both seemed to be a little bit sad, but strangely calm. What do you guys think? Effie hesitated for a few seconds, then shrugged. I sort of agree. If anyone can make it out alive from there, it's Princess. It sounds impossible, but, I mean, it's her. You know how she is. Kai remained silent for a bit, then nodded. That's what I believe, too. Or at least try to believe. Saying those words, he looked around with concern and said, but Cassie must be devastated. Have you seen her? Sunny stared at him grimly, then turned away. Quote. I did earlier. She is. Strangely, today the blind girl was nowhere to be found. To his relief, Kai sighed, then rubbed his face. Ah, I really want to sleep. It's tough, staying awake for that long. What about you, guys? Sunny shrugged. I'm fine for now. I also have a pack of military-grade stimulants to keep me awake for a few more days. Effie glanced at them and grinned. I am not sleepy at all. However, to be honest, I am dying from hunger. There has to be food here somewhere, right? Sometime later, they were in the cafeteria of the hospital complex. Sunny and Kai were already done with their dinner, and observed with dark fascination as Effie was finishing her fourth serving. There was a small mountain of empty plates in front of her. Finally, the huntress was done with the food and leaned back tiredly in her wheelchair, full of satisfaction. Ah, that's life. Sunny, go bring me something to drink. He stared at her with a dark expression and asked. Quote. I already brought you the last 3 trays. Why don't you ask Kai? Effie grinned. Aren't you the youngest? Respect your elders, brat. Also, Kai and I are big shots now. Way out of your league. Why would I ask a valiant true name awakened to serve me food when there's a nameless gremlin like you loitering around? Sunny gritted his teeth, then obediently stood up and went to bring the young woman a few drinks. When he returned, Kai looked at him apologetically. Sorry about that, Sunny. Actually, I am really surprised that you didn't receive a true name as well. No one deserves it more than you, in my opinion. Really. Sunny shifted uncomfortably and said. Yeah, well, you're not wrong. I do deserve a true name, don't I? What a travesty. Effie giggled. Hey, Knight, what do you think Sunny's true name would be? Kai blinked a couple of times, though for a bit, then said with a smile. I'm not sure. Something like, famous last words. He chuckled lightly, and then added. Or, no really, that happened. What about you, Effie? What do you think? Effie glanced at Sunny, then smiled with mischief. Quote. Looks good in a dress. He stared at her with murder in his eyes. Hey, while the gaunt young woman was laughing, Sunny turned to Kai and frowned. Speaking of true names, Effie I can understand, but, Nightingale, you were really named just like your band. What's up with that? Then, he looked at the charming archer with suspicion and said in a grave tone. Kai, tell me honestly, the spell is also one of your fangirls, right? His friend choked on his drink, then wiped his face awkwardly and gave Sunny a reproachful look. Finally, he looked down and sighed. If it is, then not in a good way. At best, it's a saucing. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 375 to 375, Separate Paths. 1,196 words. Sunny smiled and leaned back on his chair, then looked at his friends with curiosity. There was a question he really wanted to ask, but tried not to up until now. Quote. What's your second ability, anyway? His words hung in the air for a few moments. Suddenly, Kai coughed with embarrassment and looked away. After a couple of seconds, he said in a strange tone. I can see really far now, when I want to. Even when there's no light. I am also supposed to be able to see through illusions and all forms of obfuscation, whatever that means. And, I can also see through objects. Sunny and Effie stared at him and asked almost simultaneously. Like, through walls, like, through clothes. Kai hid behind his glass, lingered for a bit, and then answered in a small voice. Quote. Yes, but I would never. While Sunny tried to imagine why would Kai refuse to look through walls, Effie laughed out loud. I see. What a great ability. She shook her head, then turned to Sunny and asked. Hey, doofus, I bet you often wanted to stab me with something sharp. Wanna try? He frowned in confusion, then raised an eyebrow. No, why would I stab you? Effie looked at him with expectation clearly written on her face, then sighed in disappointment when he didn't move. Ah, that's a shame. I wanted to demonstrate my second ability to you. Basically, it makes my whole body invulnerable. Well, comparatively, of course. Skin of steel, that sort of deal. A very sweet comprehensive defense boost, if I do say so myself. Sunny blinked and looked at the gaunt young woman with a bit of awe. Indeed, that was a very powerful ability. Combined with Effie's previous one, it turned her into an exceedingly formidable presence on the battlefield. As if she had not been a real menace already. Effie glanced at him and asked curiously. Well, what about you? He shifted slightly. A very neat type of conditional short-distance teleportation. Kai can see through walls, I can go through walls, while you can just plow through them, I guess. In your usual barbarous fashion. Effie grinned. Plowing, interesting choice of words. I wonder if. Sunny hurriedly changed the subject. So, what are your plans, guys? What citadels are you going to? His sudden question changed the mood of the conversation. For a while, a strange silence settled among them. All three had contemplative, wistful expressions on their faces. This situation was inevitable, really, but they tried to avoid the discussion for as long as possible. Mostly because it was both slightly awkward and slightly sad. Back on the Forgotten Shore, the three of them had forged a bond, and now, depending on their choices, that bond would most likely either weaken or break. The future was going to lead each on their own path, perhaps in opposite directions. For better or worse, they were about to go their separate ways. Perhaps fate would bring them together again, one day. Or perhaps not. After a while, Effie sighed. I don't know, really. I have received invitations from both Clan Valor and Clan Song, but, you know me. I don't do well with authority. Plus, none of them have moved a finger to help me when I really needed it. Only now that I am a hot commodity are they all suddenly kind and friendly. Rubs me the wrong way, to be honest. She looked at her wheelchair, then slumped in it tiredly. Anyway, I might take them up on the offer, or I might not. It depends on what the fastest way to get ready for the second nightmare would be. Maybe I'll have a better chance of becoming a master soon if I stay independent and don't have to compete against the actual heirs for resources and attention. After the second nightmare, one's spiritual body became their physical body. Reaching the rank of a master would free Effie from her terrible disability, so Sunny understood her motivation perfectly. Now he knew why she had said that for her, striving to conquer the second nightmare was the only way. Funnily enough, through no wish of his own, Sunny had ended up in a similar situation. Kai remained silent for a few moments. Then, he too sighed. As for me, my agency has secured me a very good position in Bastion. So I'll be going there soon. I won't have to fight another nightmare creature for a long, long time. I guess, maybe even never. For someone who was speaking about being safe and comfortable for the rest of his life, he didn't sound too happy. There was a note of reluctance in his voice. Even, shame. Sunny frowned. You drop that tone immediately, Kai. There's nothing wrong with living like a person should, not having to worry about being eaten every goddamn day. Don't even think about feeling bad about it. Got it. The charming young man smiled sadly and nodded. I do. Please forgive my ungratefulness. But what about you, Sunny? Sunny scratched the back of his head, then shrugged. Well, I am rich now. You won't believe it, guys, but as it turns out, scribbling a few words about the things you see in the dream realm can actually earn you money. And, I think I can weasel my way into receiving a salary from the academy as a research assistant, whatever that means. So, actually, I haven't decided on a particular citadel yet. But I can pick pretty much any of them, since the government is being very friendly. Both Effie and Kai stared at him with incredulous expressions, clearly trying to imagine Sunny as an academic or even an instructor. Then, both shook their heads simultaneously. Can't imagine. Yeah, sounds wrong. About the citadels, though. So which one are you going to choose? He thought for a bit, then shrugged. Don't know yet, but I can tell you a secret, something that very few people know or think about. A very wise man told me to base my choice on it. Sunny lingered for a moment, then said seriously. Plumbing. The secret to a happy life is to find a citadel with great plumbing. Soon, it was time to say goodbye. Their parting was both warm and bittersweet. After seeing Kai and Effie off, Sunny lingered outside for a bit, and then returned to his room on one of the underground levels of the hospital complex. It was already evening, and his eyes were full of sand. With an irritated snarl, Sunny took one of the stimulant patches out of the pack and plastered it on his skin. Immediately, a cold fire flowed through his veins. His heart accelerated, and his mind cleared. Sunny felt refreshed, energized, and ready to chew on mountains. Of course, there was a price to pay for such a boost. It would be inevitably followed by a debilitating crash of the same magnitude. Unless he used another stimulant, that is, and then another, and another. Only with each new one, the duration of the effect would shorten, and the strain on his body would increase. If he was a mundane human, his heart would have probably exploded just from one of these unassuming patches. The government didn't joke around with its military tech, but he wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. He had to do a few more things, like finally checking on his new memory. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report.